me some snacks, but I ain't had time.
Just because our names sound the same, Nicole, doesn't mean that you can sit in my chair.
Today the 20th.
This special meeting of the Pontiac City Council is hereby called to order Friday, May 20th, 2022 at 3:03 p.m. Please rise for the pledge of allegiance. Roll call, Clerk Grandison.
Carrington,
Present.
Goodman,
Present.
James, McGinnis,
Present.
Nicholson,
Here.
Parker,
Present.
Rutherford. Mr. President, there's 2 members missing today.
Quorum being established, is there a motion to authorize council members James and Rutherford their excuse from the meeting for personal reasons?
So moved.
Support.
Moved by Goodman, seconded by Carrington. We anticipate Councilman James and Councilman Rutherford will join us throughout the duration. And I also at this point want to let the clerk, Garland Doyle, and his family know that he's in our thoughts. An emergency situation came up, and we thank Deputy Clerk Grandison for rising to the occasion to be able to provide clerk support for this special meeting of the City Council. Hearing no further discussion on the motion to authorize the excusing of council members James and Rutherford from the meeting for personal reasons, roll call, Clerk Grandison.
Goodman,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Nicholson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Carrington.
Yes.
5-0.
That motion carries. Is there a motion to approve this meeting's agenda as presented?
So moved.
Support.
Moved by Nicholson, seconded by Goodman. Any discussion? Any amendments, questions, or clarification? Hearing none, roll call on adoption and approval of the meeting agenda as presented. Clerk Grandison.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Nicholson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Carrington,
Yes.
Goodman.
Yes.
5-0.
That motion carries. Thank you. Budget Orama continues, and we give the floor to the administration to queue it up for the grants portion of today's session.
Thank you, Council President. As you know, the administration has been in constant contact with the legislative branch to talk about the overall reconstruction of city departments. The grants department, as it is currently being called, is a somewhat new and somewhat revitalized department. If you go back, it used to be very, very specifically the CDBG, that is Community Development Block Grant Department. And it focused only on that one federal program. As we are envisioning this department now, it is a much larger program than that. And in fact, right at this moment, it will not have the Community Development Block Grant because, as you know, that program is still contracted out to Oakland County, and we are in the process of working with HUD, the federal department of Housing and Urban Development, to be able to take that program from Oakland County and bring it back in-house to the city of Pontiac. But until that happens, we do still have other activities that we are looking to foster and do through this grants department. So we will be vigorously pursuing additional funding through philanthropy, through grants, through corporate donorship. And so what you see on here is essentially the cost, the salary and associated costs to bring on a staff to do that. We do already have on staff one person who has been managing those activities, but we are actually going to increase their capacity. And additionally, then you will see the training expense, which we have already talked about. and just general supplies that any department would need to operate.
Thank you. Pro Tem Carrington.
Thank you, President McGinnis. So currently, Deputy Mayor, can you tell me exactly how much this is coming out of our fund balance? And how much are you projecting that you're gonna fill these positions with grants?
Okay. So, I'm just going to rephrase it.
Well, since you said it was a
Correct,
new
correct,
department.
correct. Yes. No. I'm just going to rephrase it instead of saying how much of it is coming out of fund balance. I will say that the entirety of the $412,750 that you see is scheduled to come from general fund dollars. The intention is that as the department is up and running, the grants that they bring in, the funding, the dollars that they bring in, will partially pay for their salaries and will pay for a lot of additional activity throughout the city. Mayor.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think too, to put a little bit of a finer point on that, we had a study done, as you're aware, by Baker Tilly to talk about how to constitute this department. And and through conversations that the city had in the past with Baker Tilly, as well as with the other consultants, Gabe and Phil, who did the presentation remotely here as well, we are pretty optimistic that we can secure grant funding to pay for the entirety of this operation for at least a couple of years. That doesn't mean it's a done deal, because it's not, but and certainly Ms. Borngesser can, I think, speak in greater detail to the degree of our optimism in that regard. But the hope is that we will be able to get grants to cover most, possibly all of it. But I think we're cautiously optimistic that a substantial part of these costs in particular will be covered by grants. And the idea being that we need to set up this department before this department starts actually bringing in grants and realizing some of that revenue. And we need to set up this department before HUD is satisfied that we have the infrastructure to bring back in-house our CDBG dollars, from which we can get 20% of the value of those CDBG dollars utilized as administrative costs. So, certainly I don't know how you'd like the timing of this to work, but Ms. Borngesser, can you speak to that portion of the question in terms of how optimistic we are about covering some or all of this through grants, understanding that nothing is for certain as of now?
Absolutely. So we're very optimistic for lots of different reasons. One being that we have capacity building narratives currently being worked on, due to be submitted on June 1st of this year to funders for funding of actual department costs relating to centralized grant management, or what we're proposing to call the Department of Grants and Philanthropy. And so right now our current ask is $1.1 million, which far exceeds this amount that you see here in the budget to pay for capacity needs for the department and others. Additionally, though it is not the historical practice of the city, it is best practice to write in, administrative fees and budget items into grant budgets. And though, like I said, the city had not done that historically, it is what we intend to do going forward. Typically, this is about 10% of an award, perhaps for functions of the grants department itself or other departments that would be facilitating and fulfilling the grant deliverables.
And just to piggyback on Ms. Borngesser's comment, I think when she talks about submitting this proposal for over $1 million in grant funding on June 1st, I think that based on the conversations that she has had with potential foundations, as well as the conversations that the consultants have had with them, when foundations look at building capacity and providing grants to do so, they seem to be particularly excited, first and foremost, about building capacity in a grants department, because if you build capacity there, one can sustain bringing in these third-party revenue sources longer term. And so would it be fair to say that you know, the first priority for those giving donations is likely to be to pay for these positions or this department?
That is correct, and that's for, again, a couple of reasons. One, they have seen this model executed and succeed in other cities, Detroit being one of them. They did exactly this, what we're doing right now. Additionally, they wish to give to the city for other capacities and for other programming, but they can't make grant awards to a city that doesn't have the capacity to manage grant awards, and the department itself is really the mechanism for doing so, both responsibly and with some efficacy.
Other grants and philanthropy questions?
I did have one.
Councilman
real
Parkley.
quick. So basically, good afternoon. How you doing? And thank you, Brother President. Real quick, I know we reviewed the grant and philanthropy overview at one of our council meetings about a couple of weeks back. So this basically just covers the financial piece of what you presented?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And to recap, how many positions would this budgetary amount provide for in the new grants and philanthropy department?
This provides for 4, including me.
And in the finance department structure, it shows a grants accountant, if you will. So it's housed within the finance department staff, but will have a great deal of collaboration or a functional capacity building for the further pursuit and, more importantly, the administration of grant awards. Is that the expectation?
That's correct, totaling 5, which is the communicator requirement by HUD for CDBG as well.
Good to know. Other grants and philanthropy discussion and questions. Legislative Council Sharp.
I see that obviously this is a new department. There is no item for other professional services. Do you not anticipate the need for other professional services in terms of partnering like you did with Baker Tilly and
So we do, but those are typically grant-funded services. So, for instance, we have a technical assistant grant application out to Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan to the amount of $70,000 for continued technical assistance in public services. So, our objective is to be a self-fulfilling and self-sustaining department that doesn't require fund allocation to the department for services as such. It's the goal of the department to fulfill those needs financially by raising the dollars itself.
There is an important question, though, I think you're raising, Ms. Sharp, which is, in the case of Gabe and Phil, they are paid directly by a foundation. So that money doesn't even come through the city. So that would not be reflected here, for example. But implicitly, at least, and you, I'm sure you're already thinking this, to the extent that we are receiving grants, and we then are receiving grants and dispersing grant money to hire consultants or other professional services. I don't see Mr. Carrington here, but the question then is, how is that accounted for on these sheets? And I think Mr. Carrington is probably the best person to ask about that. Or perhaps Deputy Mayor, maybe you have some insight into that in terms of whether we should have a line item here in this department for other professional services or whether it would be accounted for elsewhere.
Yeah. So, Mr. Carrington is on his way. He was delayed at another meeting, but the answer to the mayor's question is that those lines. So every other line that you've seen in any other budget is here. It's just condensed because it's 0 and it doesn't have any historic item. So because there is nothing in that line, not historically, because historically this department hasn't existed, and not budgeted in this year, you don't see it. But those lines exist.
Others that wish to have the floor? Anything further, Ms. Borngesser, that you'd like to elevate in the conversation?
No, I'm happy to see the budget as it stands, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
I will note that, I think we've called this department a number of different names. Grants Department on the agenda, and then I think at one meeting I called it the Grants Management Department. I think the most likely title is going to end up either being Grants and Philanthropy Department or Grants Management and Philanthropy, something that incorporates the word philanthropy. So I know that Ms. Borngesser mentioned that word in her presentation, but I just want to mention that because I know we've, much like community concern specialist, this has been an evolving title. So as you hear that title in the future, that's probably where we'll end up, just because in the grants fundraising world, apparently grants and philanthropy mean two very different sources of types of funding.
We're in the Pontiac Stadium phase of the Silverdome naming. First it was Pontiac Metropolitan Stadium,
Yeah,
Pon Met, and then ultimately the Pontiac Silverdome. So we understand that there may be some evolution in terms of what's the most appropriate title internally. The city of Detroit is obviously many scales over larger in landmass and population, staff capacity as a municipality. But can you bring to the surface for us a better understanding of other comparable municipalities and their grants and philanthropy capacity in-house? Would we be making up lost ground to become more sort of municipality standard for a community of our size? Would we be adding above average because we actually have it? Or, I mean, what are we looking at in terms of the landscape of other municipalities?
So it's really apples to oranges. Different municipalities handle it in a lot of different ways. There's a centralized grant management approach. There's a decentralized approach. Some municipalities handle all of their grantsmanship through foundations and economic development corps and various other entities. Baker Tilly did take a look at the city of Flint, Kalamazoo, Detroit, by taking a look at scale, obviously, and the city of Baltimore uniquely, to try and build out this model. We did want to replicate the model in the city of Detroit for scale, because we know it's successful, we know it works in this landscape, we understand the history, which is a similar one to the city of Pontiac, and we would be essentially in a similar place to the city of Detroit per scale, to where it was when it built its Department of Advancement and Grants, which is what they call it.
Thank you. Others that wish to have the floor? Hearing no further discussion at this juncture on grants and philanthropy, we segue now to community development, which incorporates many different functions. We give the floor to the administration.
Thank you again, Council President. So, again, this is one of the overall structural changes that are being proposed. As it exists today, you have a planning department, an economic development department, and a building department. They operate separate from one another. I will say that the directors of those departments do attempt to get out of their silos, but the departments themselves are in fact siloed. And what we are now doing is taking all three of those, bringing them together and making one department with divisions underneath called community development. And so we are now looking at a specific division inside of that, which is the planning division. We do have the city planner here tonight. But just highlights that I will tell you is, as you are looking at the budget, you will see an increase in the salaries line, and that is because we are, in fact, asking to bring on additional city planners. The one of the main reasons for that is we are just don't have the capacity needed to actually, in a timely fashion, respond to all of the activities that are coming in. So every time someone wants to build a building, every time someone wants to make any type of meaningful change to the landscaping of a commercial property. And when I say meaningful change, I'm not talking about, hey, you know, we want to cut the grass differently, or we want to add a walkway. I'm really saying you want to add a fence, you want to take down multiple trees, you want to add a retaining wall, you want to do any type of serious land elevation changes. All of those changes require adherence to the zoning ordinance. And so someone has to review those documents. Right now we have 2 planners on staff. we are looking to bring on 2 additional planners. Bringing on that additional capacity will also allow the city the capacity that it will need to update our city's master plan. This is something that has not been done in a timely fashion. And again, we are looking to actually get ourselves back on track with those activities. Other than that, you will, of course, again see the dedication to training staff, and the other changes are minimal.
The $100,000 for ordinances that we see, that correspondingly relates to the master plan?
Yes.
And beyond, work that would come out of that with the expanded capacity with additional staff?
That would be correct.
So, Mayor and Deputy Mayor, do you want to give us a broader sense of, so you'll have now, moving forward, a community development director. So that is the department head, and that's sort of in your cabinet of sorts. And then you'll have within that department planning, economic development, and building inspection or building.
That's correct. Is Deputy Mayor, is the Community Development Department Director, is that salary and associated costs accounted for in the budget?
It should be accounted for in the budget. My belief is that it is in here. Director Carrington, like, as I said, will be here. He had his times confused. He thought that it was 4.
He's here.
But yes.
So perhaps he can speak to that.
So, did you hear the question?
I did, yes.
When you come to it, because obviously as we looked at in previous with recreation, that's a new department director, and so it's slicing off some from the general fund, but some from the senior activities and some from the youth recreation. So we're just looking to see where that might be booked for general ledgers. So obviously we're going to look at this from a planning and then economic development and then building perspective. Are there any other further questions or deliberations, though, about community development broadly and the
President McGinnis.
Pro Tem
Just a point of clarity concerning ordinances. I didn't really hear what the mayor said or the deputy mayor said of the 100,000.
Do you want to, Mr. Gustafson, want to elaborate further? Because there is some multiple stages that could be, and let us know if it'll go beyond this fiscal year as well, because it'll be an involved process. But let the council know what we're looking at.
Yeah, what we decided is part of obviously capacity building, as Alex had mentioned in regards to what we're working with her on in regards to capacity building on that aspect, but also in regards to bringing on 2 planners, one being community planner and one being more entry level. The thought was also in regard to the importance, as Deputy Mayor and the Mayor brought up, in regards to allowing for a certain type of funding related to a master plan, citywide master plan, and then also potentially, depending on how the time frame works out, to obviously get into a rewrite of our ordinances, zoning ordinances and so forth, a more comprehensive review. Yes, I would say it's going to take longer than 1 year, but a initial consultant to come on for a 1-year period should suffice in regards to that dollar amount, and then we can add on some additional sub-area plans like we have done or plan to do.
And I know it predates, I believe, your time with the city, but can you share with the council when was the last time the master plan was done? Obviously, it's intended to be done every 5 years. That hasn't been able to
14.
happen. But when the zoning ordinance were last comprehensively
Sure.
dived into?
The master plan was done and adopted in 2014, and the zoning ordinance was done as a rewrite in 2012.
Pro Tem.
Just a quick follow-up. Also, you increased training expenses for this department. Have you anticipated what training staff will be going to, or it's just like a placeholder until you determine some of these training opportunities?
No, I think that great question. And actually, I can expand in regards to, yes, we went up to about 14,200. Here we're looking at the opportunity in regards to a couple things. We got new planners coming on board. There is the Michigan Association of APA, or what we call MAP. And then there's also the National APA. There's also ULI programming, and
Is that Urban Land Institute?
yes,
Okay.
yes, Urban Land Institute. There's many other organizations. There's even the American Society of Landscape Architects. And, so there's other opportunities, but also we baked in regards to planning, we also provide staff to two commissions and a board, Zoning Board of Appeals, Planning Commission, and the HDC. And I think,
And that's the Historic District Commission.
yes, felt it very important that we also provide training to those members of those boards in many shape or forms, either through going to a conference or bringing some speakers in for that purpose.
All right, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Stevens.
So just to elaborate, in every department you will see a $4,000 allocation per head, but as Mr. Gustafson said, in this department you saw an additional funding because of the volunteer groups that are underneath the department and need training as well.
Other planning discussion. Have there been, I know this is a few months in, and this is a broader perspective, but have we, in all honesty, looking at it honestly, internally, has our limited planning capacity hindered the city being able to fulfill its role or meet the opportunities that may arise with planning needs that could spur neighborhood and commercial growth? Any feedback that the administration and staff want to share?
I think it has probably slowed down the speed of some responsiveness to inquiries. I think it's probably slowed down the drafting of some ordinance amendments, things like that. So I do think there have been some effects along those lines. Now, there's another aspect to this, of course, because currently our planning manager, that's to say Mr. Gustafson, who's in charge of the planning division, also oversees code enforcement officers. And so the plan is, as it's been described and laid out by Deputy Mayor Stevens, would consolidate the code enforcement officers under the same category as the rental unit folks and the building inspector folks. So obviously some significant portion of Mr. Gustafson's time currently, or whoever, that role, because I don't want to personalize it to Mr. Gustafson, but that role of planning has also overseen code enforcement functions. And so to the extent that that's not the case moving forward, that presumably would free up some of that time as well. So I want to, as I think through what we're proposing, there are a couple of aspects to this. There's adding some planning positions, but there's also freeing up some time that currently is spent overseeing code enforcement officers.
Anything you'd like to elaborate further, Mr. Gustafson?
No, I well spoken. I think the mayor did it very nicely. And it was kind of interesting. Lately I've been obviously working with Alex and the consultant team in regards to building capacity within that department, and I think it's important. I've been here about 4 years, and a team of two, in regards to, we have reviewed roughly 900 projects and permitting for the last 4 years, which if you translate that into dollars, you're looking at $1.1 billion worth of construction value in the city of Pontiac. I mean, and right now we're seeing here in 2023, we are reviewing about 25 projects that are coming into us that will have to go through various phases of development, either zoning map amendments, special land uses, site plan reviews. So it will be the future shows a very positive way of how we'll be able to facilitate in a much better way, more efficient, and then get on to the longer range planning that we as planners love to do. So,
What's the planning and then Councilman Parker, what's the planning capacity of some other comparable municipalities? I imagine we have been behind or understaffed, but will this put us more in a competitive
yes,
footing?
Yes, it would. I would say, like, even looking at other communities, we're looking at either at our size, the same population, you're looking at probably like 3 to 4. Yeah.
Thank you. Councilman Parker.
Thank you. Just real quick question. As we talking about all these additional bodies, do we have enough space within the physical plant to house all those bodies?
We do.
Excellent question. Yeah, and feel free if you want to use this as a segue to talk about
Yeah.
potential spatial relations with the various community development moving pieces.
So that is actually a wonderful question, and I'm happy to address it. Just a short history here. When the emergency managers were in the city of Pontiac, they closed down a number of different buildings, and in doing so, they brought all of those people back only to be in this one building. But it wasn't just people, it was also files. So if you go around City Hall right now, we have a number of rooms that are meant to be workstations, but are full of files. We have been diligently working throughout the month of May doing space planning, trying to figure out which files needed to be kept, which files needed to be kept and needed to actually be accessed, and then also trying to figure out what made sense as far as who should sit with whom. And so I'm happy to say that to your question, do we even have enough space in the building? Through our due diligence of determining that we have actually a good number of files that have reached their limit of record retention and actually need to be disposed of. Once we've started that process of disposing of them, and then taking files that need to be kept but don't need to be accessed for record retention policies, moving them to that space, taking files from what used to be the Community Development Block Grant Office, moving them to a new space in the basement, we will in fact open up enough workstations in the city to house all of these individuals, and we should be done with all of that workspace planning and moving sometime in the middle of June.
Okay, well, that gets me to my other question. But thank you, that was very good. If I recall, when we were looking at, I believe when we were doing building and fire safety, one of the things I think they addressed was in the basements, particularly around some of the fire rooms, there was a leak or had a propensity to flood. Are we aware, and are we going to use that space? Will that be repaired sometime before?
So I will have to look more into that specific question, but that does get into what we had discussed last night, the idea of, what are the needs of this building. We talked about the leak in the mayor's office that had to be replaced. I do know that there was in a room on the ground floor that had flooded. I know that has been repaired, but I do not know about an additional concern, but I will look into that.
Thank you.
Legislative Council Sharp.
Just a quick question, just for clarity. The positions that were recommended, the community planner just wanted to know which figure is actually correct. So there was a figure in the additional document that was given with the initial budget, and the subsequent figure is like $10,000 less. So it's 85 and 75. Just to let you know.
It's the subsequent figure is the figure that we are using because that subsequent figure includes all of the changes that were made.
Okay.
So the original document that you received did not include all of the raises that we were offering for existing staff members. So that second document that you got actually had the updated numbers.
So just to be clear, the second document I received doesn't have any 3% in it. I'm talking about the subsequent that was given that doesn't have a 3%, but it was subsequent to the initial.
No. So you want the one that has the 3% increase. That is the correct document.
Okay, I'm not sure what that figure is. Okay.
Others that wish to have the floor. Deputy Mayor?
It's the 75 is the correct number.
Others that wish to have the floor? We may, in fact, revisit some planning questions that naturally shake out when we're discussing economic development and building. But transitioning now to the economic development question, Mayor and Deputy Mayor.
It's buildings next.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm just looking at we'll do building next. I'm looking at the organizational chart. Sorry. Building.
They're all right here. So building. Yes?
Sure.
Yes, it's on the agenda.
Okay. So we're going to follow the agenda building. Okay. So here you see a lot of change. And the reason why you see a lot of change here is we are transitioning away from outsourcing this function to Wade Trim. So we're bringing this activity in-house. Additionally, we're making a fairly large change and taking the code enforcement officers and putting them back into the building department, which is where they were originally housed. One additional change that you will see is we currently have code enforcement officers and we have rental inspection officers. Those two separate positions are going to become one position. The other thing that I will note is the building department is what you call an enterprise fund. So that means that these are not general fund dollars that you are looking at. The building department essentially serves, as Councilman Nicholson likes to compare city government to business, it acts as its own independent business and has been a very self-sustaining and sufficient business. And so part of that business is not just allowing buildings to be built, it is making sure that those buildings stay in compliance once they are built, which is why the code enforcement officers are being moved back into that department. Moving the code enforcement officers out of the general fund is a large portion of the administration's policy and program to get the general fund back to, or move it in the direction of itself being self-sufficient, but also moving those individuals back into the building fund, back into a overall department called community development, is meant to help actually focus on the idea that if we are being serious about saying we want the community to grow, we have to make sure that those resources are there and that those resources are there not in a silo. As we have gone through these last 5 months, at differing times, council has contacted the administrative office and wanted to know, why did this blighted situation occur or happen? And you would relate to us that you were told, oh, that is code enforcement, or oh, that is the building department, and there was siloed miscommunication. So the purpose of this is to address that and break that silo so that we will not have that miscommunication again. Other than those changes, so you will see that we are taking out the large amount of money that is being paid in professional services to Wade Trim. That money is then being redistributed to salaries and all of the associated cost with salary, so FICA, all of that good stuff. And then you will see that we are continuing to have the other items in there that we need to actually operate the department.
Pro Tem Carrington.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mayor, I'm sorry, I need some water. Been a long day. But I see that the mayor's budget for 22-23 actually is a great reduction in the previous budget. So do you think this department, you bring this department up to capacity enough with that reduction?
So the reduction that you are seeing is a reflection of the difference between the markup of paying an outside firm and having it in-house.
And this department would have 4 code enforcement officers?
No.
How many?
There will actually be a total of
No.
8, but I want to say it's 10 because the two, we currently have 4 code enforcement officers. We're hiring an additional 4 code enforcement officers, which is 8, and the 2 rental inspection officers will become code enforcement officers, and you'll have this larger team that does both activities.
Thank you for that clarity.
Yeah, it's a really important point because there are really 3 purposes behind this. The deputy mayor hit on one, which is to eliminate those silos so that different divisions aren't miscommunicating about whose responsibility different code enforcement like issues are. The other is to cross-train folks so that instead of 8 under our budget, because we're doubling the number of code enforcement officers from 4 to 8. So instead of 8 code enforcement officers and 2 rental unit inspectors, have 10 folks who do both responsibilities. That way, on an as-needed basis, we'll have more code enforcement to the extent those issues are hot at any point in time, or we can have more rental unit folks to the extent that those issues are hot or we're backlogged there. So it'll provide a little more flexibility in priorities. And then the third reason is because the building department, and I touched on this the other day, because the building department is a self-sustaining fund, it's also a way to make sure that code enforcement responsibilities and functions are funded with the frankly excess revenues that building is generating relative to the costs that building is facing, as opposed to paying for code enforcement out of the general fund.
All right, thank you, Mayor Grimal. Councilman Parker.
Thank you. One quick question. As I looked at your report and looked at salaries, did we do a salary study before we assigned those? Because they look low to me, but maybe they're not.
So, great question. Yes, we do have a salary study that we did. What you are referring to is part of the reason why we have dedicated everyone getting a 3% raise, but there are actually some salaries that were increased by more than that to bring them up to a minimum level to bring them in line with averages to make them more competitive, just generally speaking.
And the second part of that is, certainly if we plan on using more space, are we going to hire some additional janitorial staff to be able to clean that space? Because it only lists 2 in the
Thank you.
right here.
Point taken. Thank you.
Any other questions, Councilman Parker?
No, sir. I'm good.
All right,
Thank you.
Councilman Nicholson.
With the addition of those code enforcement officers, something that's been talked about a lot from the 50th District Court and our Law in the Court subcommittee has been around blight court, when those, especially on the rental side, when we really start to do far more enforcement, I want to make sure that the 50th District Court is prepared to take on those referrals that will come from the blight court once we hit that $500 threshold and they get bound over. I mean, right now they're in a precarious time, right? Because they're just getting back to jury trials. They also are doing a lot more in-person activities. Staffing wise, of course, they took some hits really recently with their court administrator being out for some time, but then their administrative resource leaving. So I want to make sure that we are working with the 50th District Court to make sure that they have the resources to bolster as well. We're bolstering enforcement. We're definitely going to be sending more cases their way.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Much of this is now handled through the blight court, which is not funded through the district court and does not occur at the district court, but happens typically in these chambers with a, I believe, city-funded magistrate-like position. So to the extent...
Right, I understand. The only reason I bring that up is because code enforcement has not been they've been trying to handle all of those things in Blight Court, which really, I mean, as more successful as it has been with the onset of the Blight Court is fantastic, but there's this whole second step to that we really haven't been able to do because the court hasn't had the resources.
Right.
And so we've been thoughtful of that and trying to keep it contained within the Blight Court, but we've got a lot of these situations that are just run rampant, right? We're at the brink now with a develop, in my district with, now we're at that point where we've got units and parcels that have to be bound over, and we just and Tammy in our last subcommittee said, "Are you guys ready for that?" And there was a big sigh, going, "We're going to have to figure it out.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but we're going to have to figure it out."
Well, and that's where I thought you might be heading there, which is what happens after Blight Court, to the extent that the entity, typically it's a corporate entity, but maybe individuals being cited, aren't just paying up at that point, but are still resisting and not doing what they need to be. And obviously the next step is going to court, as you just observed. It's challenging because in terms of the judicial capacity, which is to say the number of judges there, that's determined by the state court administrator's office. So there's no way we have to hire more judges, or for even for the 50th District Court itself to hire more judges. That's all determined by the state court administrator's office. Now they may have, if that's not the bottleneck, if you will, in processing the cases, if it's not the number of judges or the number of courtrooms and is instead clerical staff, then that is something they have control over. I just don't know exactly where the bottleneck would be there. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is, to the extent that their caseload goes up, there is the possibility that they could make the case to the state court administrator's office of, hey, we need another judge, because that's all determined by weighted caseloads. And so there's this whole study that the state court administrator's office does to determine the ideal or optimal number of judges per district court, per circuit court in the state. And then those adjustments are recommended by the state court administrator's office, but have to ultimately be approved by the legislature.
Right. Yeah, we're aware of all that. I think that the problem is on both sides. It certainly is clerical. Their main clerical resource is not there, hence why Judge Walker is doing all of her own budgeting right now for the entire court. So we had that conversation last time. I think it's on both sides, of course, but I think just giving that heads up to say, hey, you've got double the amount of enforcement that's going to potentially be coming your way. And really, when we think about it, it's not even double, right? When we just talked about if we talk about it like a business, while building and safety has been meeting their obligations as far as expenses, code enforcement had not. So we know that we can certainly not only double the capacity, but also work on the effectiveness. I think the 50th District Court is going to be part of that, and giving them that heads up to say, this is coming down the pike. You might want to get, whatever forms and reports ready, because you're likely going to need resources that they can't provide for themselves as well. But clerical is a huge need right now. We were talking about what resources could we, pull up a chair and help out with. But that's, that's just where my thought was heading.
To that point, almost, I would say, a month after we got here, we did have conversations with the chief judge to let her know the direction that we wanted to move in. And we had started having conversations about, how are we writing our tickets? How are we producing the evidence that's coming to you to make it most efficient for you to move these items through your docket? Unfortunately, again, as you referenced, there have been most recently some personnel slowdowns at the court. So we've, between their slowdowns, our budget season, and they're actually being in contract negotiations, that harmonization has been put on hold. But yes, we have been in contact and working through exactly what needs to happen to make it as efficient as possible, so that they could actually process what we are expecting to be an increased caseload.
I know one of the conversations we'd had was regarding there needing to be, and to make the process very swift from Blight Court to 50th District, a record. I will say on the last 3 Blight Courts, I've not been able to get into the Zoom call. So that's just something we really need to maybe assign an IT resource, because and I've got complaints from residents too that have said they click on that and they sit in the waiting room the whole time, that they never actually get admittance. And I know that happens over Zoom. It doesn't happen in the same way that it happens here, where it's broadcasted on multiple outlets. I think we need to look into changing that, because that is a problem, and that has created a bottleneck because she doesn't have the court can take the record and then use that, but as it is right now, there's no formal record from the Blight Court that she can have that was a comment she made in the last 50th District Court meeting. So I think some of those administrative things we can continue to work on, because it sounds like it's certainly a work in progress.
So I was just made aware of this issue yesterday morning because I was contacted by a resident as well. We did talk with the cable director this morning about it, although the initial indication that we've heard is that it's another staff person's responsibility to let people into the Zoom call, not the IT department, not the cable director. So we can talk offline, but we're trying to work through that problem. I just learned of it yesterday.
If I could, because
Take the microphone, and then I'll have a question for you next to make the trip worth your while.
I didn't hear, thank you. I did not hear about the issue in Blood Court yesterday, but I know that a couple of weeks ago there was a situation in regards to somebody else, and usually the way it's worked is that whoever on the staff, either Tammy or Matt, whatever, would ask the magistrate if it's okay to let other people in, and that magistrate said no. I don't know if that was the case of what happened yesterday. I'm not certain.
And then my question while you're up there.
Yeah.
I thought further in terms of the alleviating of the capacity challenge of you having code enforcement under planning. What percentage of your week is spent on code enforcement and the facilitation of those functions?
Since we lost our code enforcement manager back in November, I would say I'm probably at 55 to 60% of my time is code enforcement.
And thinking down the road,
My microphone off. But thinking down the road, the reverse question comes to me with our building official. What additional burden or time balance are we creating in terms of new roles reporting to him, and so, or them, talking about the position versus the individual. But that's something that we can talk through further, but that's very helpful for us to understand in terms of what this means for planning with the reorganization, and not only what it means for code enforcement by having, staff that could be dedicated completely, but then when we're looking at the building question, that's a question that comes to my mind.
Regarding the building official portion of that
Correct.
question, our intention is to still have a person in a manager, and again, it may not be manager because of the way these terms are structured at City Hall and the fact that
But code enforcement supervisor.
Yeah, it's a code. That's the better term.
I'm
A
coding
code-
your organizational structure.
There you go.
Back
But
to
a
the-
code enforcement supervisor. So, as Mr. Gustafson noted, planning has not had a code enforcement supervisor since November, I believe, roughly. And we do anticipate filling that position and having somebody in that role supervising the code enforcement officers / rental inspectors moving forward. So we think that should be enough to allow the building official, who, keep in mind, has, at least formally, been responsible already for supervising the rental unit inspectors, to properly focus on the building inspectors.
Councilman Parker?
Well, I had a couple of questions. One is, and certainly as we talk about, and you're adding a whole lot of people in the building inspection and planning department, will they have accurate job descriptions by the time they come on, and are they reviewing those before we hire them?
Yes.
Yes to both?
Yes to both.
Okay, thank you. And I lost it.
Well, and let me know if it comes back to you. I have a related question. So if we're looking at the organizational chart, right now, Community Development Director, that position is not filled presently. Planning Director, that is presently. Planner 1, that is presently. But we would have two positions, the two Planner 2 positions would be new. Is there presently a customer service representative that fulfills that planning department role?
There is
Okay, so that's not a vacancy. Economic Development Director, position is full. But then there would be two, there's Small Business Development Specialist Representative, that would represent a new position, correct?
Correct.
And would Customer Service Representative also represent a new position? Or
That position is currently full.
full,
There's someone
okay.
there.
And so when we go to building, we have the building official, code enforcement supervisor is a vacancy. Trade inspector ×3, are all those currently filled, or are there any vacancies?
So that is a hybrid answer. They are filled. They are filled with part-time individuals. Some of those part-time individuals actually work basically full-time, but they are not
Presently city employees there.
correct.
Okay.
But even because that's all through Wade Trim. Even with Wade Trim, their contract with Wade Trim is not as a, hey, I am here and I'm getting benefits. It is literally a contract, a subcontract.
How many of the customer service representatives under building are currently in place? Would there be any vacancies?
Those are all full.
Okay. And 5 building inspectors, how many are there presently? Is that a hybrid situation as well?
How many of the building inspectors are currently?
One full-time, 2 part-time, presently through Wade Trim, though. And so these individuals, it's their lives, it's their livelihood. They could choose to remain with that firm versus coming to a direct Pontiac hire. And then I already have in my tally code enforcement supervisor, but the code officer we have in here, how many positions, we don't have any X numbers, how many code officers would be looking at?
Another 4.
And presently there are 4. Okay, so if all goes well personnel-wise, that remains true. So we could have as few as 5 vacancies with this new reorganized community development department, but we could have as many as upwards of 10 vacancies, depending on what individuals choose to do with the Wade Trim transition. So do we feel confident, based on a very unique, challenging job environment right now with the field, what's sort of the dial-up phase for bringing these online? Do we feel comfortable that there's enough prospective candidates out there that Pontiac, with these new opportunities, would be an attractive opportunity for them? Or is this going to be something where we need to brace ourselves for a very long, arduous, interesting cycle?
We take the current challenge in finding and hiring good candidates that really all employers are facing right now. We take that very seriously. And so I don't want to be overly optimistic about it. I think we're cautiously optimistic that most of the building department folks will choose to stay on with us, at least for some period of time. But that has yet to be seen, of course. But we take seriously the challenges ahead, and certainly the sooner we can get some sense from City Council, whether it's just the actual approval of the budget or some signaling before that through these meetings about whether or not it makes sense to start posting some of these positions, the more we'll have a leg up on getting that process started. Obviously, one of the reasons why we have both a human resources consultant working right now and newly this week our human resources director on board is so that we can have a little more capacity to do the job description work, to do the standard operating procedure work that has gone undone for, frankly, many years here, and get those things nailed down through the HR consultant, while the human resources director does what human resources directors are designed to do in partnership as needed with search firms to really go out and identify potential candidates here. But yeah, it's certainly, you know, and this isn't the only area where we're talking about creating new positions and having additional hiring needs, as you know. So that's true in a lot of different departments, and we do take those challenges very seriously. When it comes to the additional code enforcement positions, you know, that's a situation obviously where it's not like that work is currently being done and would not get done starting on a date certain if we're not able to fill those positions on that date certain. But when it comes, because they're new additional positions in addition to the positions we already have. But when it comes to the weight trim staff, that's a situation where if they leave, then there's less capacity. And so you're absolutely right. We take it very seriously.
To drill down, so code enforcement supervisor, the position is presently vacant. Is it currently posted? Are we attempting to fill it? Or is it sort of on hold while reorganization was going on?
So it had been on hold during the reorganization.
There are presently 4 code officers, and the proposal is to have 4 additional, correct? Did I quote that right?
You quoted that correctly.
Okay, so we'd be looking at potentially, and that is not inclusive of the code enforcement supervisor. Or is it inclusive of the code enforcement?
Not.
Okay.
So the code enforcement supervisor position is an additional position. One thing I should note, though, is, you know, even without any additional code enforcement officers, merely cross-training the 4 existing code enforcement officers and the existing rental unit inspectors will provide some flexibility such that it will give us a little bit of wiggle room there, you know, in the event that we're not as successful bringing on people as quickly as we'd like or other people leave.
That does segue to my next question. So in a firing on all cylinders scenario, we've got code enforcement supervisor, 4 code officers, and that these 8, not counting the supervisor, these 8 will ultimately be cross-trained as rental inspectors. What's that? Oh, I'm so sorry. So those 2, there's currently 2 rental inspectors that work for the city. They're employees of Wade Trim. My question becomes, for the 4 vacancies as code officers and the 4 existing, is it the prerequisite is the cross-training, so what kind of like phasing that in, what does that look like, and does that create a higher barrier for filling those new code officers, because it's not just a straight up code officer gig, it's code officer with sprinkles on top, with rental inspection action built in?
That is a great question, and we are actually working with Wade Trim right now to design that cross-training module, but just to give a little bit more, you know, nuance to the answer. Even if we did not want to cross-train individuals and we just wanted to hire more code enforcement officers and hire more housing rental inspectors, those individuals would still need to have training. So instead of hiring code enforcement officers and training them in code enforcement and hiring rental inspection officers and training them in rental inspection, we're going to hire new enforcement officers and train them in both.
And in the budget, as I'm seeing it now, for building inspection department, what would be the line item that shows us retaining Wade Trim even partially for some positions for the months of July or August? You know, is there a line item that reflects that, or is it cold turkey in terms of line items?
So there's not a line item that reflects that, and it is cold turkey in terms of the line items because we're not sure what to anticipate. But as I said in the memo, the cover letter, if you will, or memo to City Council when I presented the budget, although our hope and expectation is that this will be ready to go on July 1st, there could very well be a transition. There also could be a need to, and I did not reflect this in the memo or cover letter, But there also could be a need to have to continue some portion of the Wade Trim contract for some limited time period to complete training. So that is something that, although when I sent the memo, we had not yet sat down with Wade Trim and had a discussion about the transition. In the past 3 weeks since I sent that, we have, and it may be that we need some contract with Wade Trim, not to provide the actual personnel power, but to do some of those training, some of that training work.
Right now, we have a training expense line item of $32,000, so that may need to go higher. Understood. The $290,000 for admin allocation to other functions, it's kind of comparable to what's happening with this current fiscal year. What does that represent?
So that represents again, this is an enterprise fund, so it operates completely separate from the general fund, which means that technically without that line item transfer, it is not participating in the overhead cost
Got it.
of running the city.
So the DPW support services essentially reflects that as well in terms of various DPW functions related to, in this instance, building inspection. What might that manifest as? It's not solely in terms of their footprint in City Hall, is it?
No, so the DPW support services would manifest more along the lines of the types of things that they do out at sites.
Okay.
Whereas,
Got it.
yes.
And that's a great segue to my next question. You can, and then the mayor, you can answer the previous point or then launch into this question. My understanding is that the Department of Public Works right now has a right-of-way inspector, maybe just one, but it's handling the matter of the people's space, that from the sidewalk to the road or in the road. So when I've got a constituent who's got dressers that have been dumped, in this instance, in the street at Chandler and Ardmore, or Chandler and Francis, that it's the DPW that we are enlisting to resolve that. Are we anticipating any difference in that approach? I'm not saying that there should be or shouldn't be, because DPW is in the position perhaps to, with the trash sanitation issues, maybe there's something that it works better. But as we're looking at the sort of efficiency of the inside and the outside of the property, are we confident that we can have a seamless, effective operation when it comes to inside or outside the right-of-way, when it comes to the exterior or in the vicinity of a commercial or residential property?
Great question. We did have a brief conversation about this. It's let me begin by saying you're right that if there's debris or garbage or dumping in the right-of-way, it's a DPW issue in terms of getting it cleaned up, basically. However, it's even more complicated than that, because to the extent we know who did it or think we know who did it, if it's the person who owns the abutting yard and somebody saw them, throwing their garbage in the street, then I think code enforcement could end up giving them a citation for it. So it's a little more nuanced, because I don't think, well, maybe it would still be the right-of-way inspector giving that citation. I'm a little unclear on that, honestly. So maybe it is the right-of-way inspector giving the citation in that case. But in any event, there are a number of right-of-way issues that can include things like the sidewalks themselves, or the nature of the roadway themselves, or even underground infrastructure, I think, conceivably. So it's a little hard to separate that from DPW.
And I'm not saying it needs to be separated, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, obviously, grass. If there's excessive height on grass, the yard and the right-of-way, it's sort of in tandem.
Yeah.
But just if there was somebody going to a property dealing with an issue, do they just say, not my job? Or are they effectively relaying that so that way it's not an additional burden or step where then the DPW right-of-way inspector's got to go? And that's what I don't know in terms
Yeah.
of practical application.
I don't see it on the org chart
I think
for
you,
DPW.
you don't see it on the org chart?
It
No,
doesn't
maybe I'm
call
missing
out
it, but I don't.
right-of-way inspector.
Yeah.
You're raising I can't speak to the org chart, so I'll allow Deputy Mayor to speak to that if the right-of-way inspector is in the org chart. In terms of the question you're raising a good point, which is even if it's in DPW, we want to make sure that that individual is trained to spot, probably not building inspector stuff inside, but code enforcement stuff outside, so that he or she is properly flagging those items while they're out at a property. And so I completely agree with your point. And we'll make sure that we follow up on that and make sure that that individual is in fact trained. The point I was going to make, going back to the previous conversation about the possibility that there'll be a longer transition or that Wade Trim might have to be engaged for a few months on a limited basis to do training. I did just want to note that, and I know you already know this, but just as a reminder, because this is being funded out of the building fund, any additional expenses in that regard would not add to our general fund balance. It would be funded out of building fund.
What's the stockpile in the building fund? What's the bank account growing to? I just don't have it presently in front of me, but
Deputy
I
Mayor?
don't have that presently in front of me
when you
either.
get a chance, just
but,
so we know how much
yes.
runway we have, if it
It's-
calls for it.
Yeah.
Mr. Carrington, do you happen to know? Okay. Okay.
I want to. Since he has it, I'm not even going to guess what I believe it is. Just to answer Councilman Nicholson's question, looking at the org chart, the engineering techs, if you look at the note underneath engineering tech, it says these were formerly classified as right-of-way inspectors.
So we anticipate, but we'll dive deeper for the DPW budget review, that it would still have that function, but it might be expanding their role.
Do you have a job description for that yet?
Yes, because we have existing engineering techs. So we have engineering techs and we have right-of-way inspectors, and we looked at what they were all doing, and it made more sense to elevate everyone to engineering tech.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to see the job description. I'm curious.
Legislative Council Sharp?
I just have a question about actually the building inspection fund. I noticed that the revenue is anticipated to be at least about $600,000 less. Is that because are you going to reduce permit fees? Because it seems like in every category there's a decrease in the amount of projected, budgeted amount.
Welcome to the podium.
Good afternoon. I can answer that. So as we look at, we were looking at the last 3 years, and currently we're in a little bit of a downslope, and so we didn't anticipate having as much revenue based upon projects coming in. And I mean, and if we get a little bit more revenue, that's great, but we didn't want to put a budget together that said we were going to have just like we did last year, and we fall really short. So we just, we always have to look at the economy, and we've had some good years and we have some bad years. There's always ups and downs.
So
And to
the
be-
signature projects of Amazon,
Yep.
UWM, is that part of what, juiced it?
In the past, yes,
Yes.
correct.
Okay.
Yep, you read my mind. That's what I was going to say is, Williams, Amazon, United Wholesale Mortgage, those projects generated an enormous amount of building permit fees. Now, on the flip side of that, the city has had to hire additional inspectors and pay extra to Wade Trim for those inspectors, and that's something I understand that City Council specifically authorized last year to be done. And so, and I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but so there was an additional contract entered into between the city and Wade Trim for additional inspectors. But nonetheless, the net revenue was still substantial when you take the additional revenue from those building permit fees for those large projects and subtract out the additional expenses of having more building inspectors for those projects.
Thank you, Legislative Council Sharp, for flagging that. Mr. Wilson, is there anything else you wanted to expound upon that in the course of this conversation?
No, I think that it's pretty much been covered.
Councilman Parker?
There's one last question. And sometime I think, I may have asked this in my head, I just don't know if I asked you. In regards to Wade Trim, and the use of those throughout the next budget coming and some of the staff coming on, is there a expected finder's fee for that process, especially if we're planning on using some of that staff for training?
Finder's fee, no. Using their staff for training, yes.
Thank you.
So there's a unique burden that is placed on building and planning in terms of where they're presently placed in City Hall, where the default visitation from a familiar resident, they think, well, that's the first office, so if for any need I have from the city of Pontiac, I come there. And I just want to acknowledge the staff in that office that that puts a higher burden and threshold, so thank you for handling that as diplomatically and as professionally as possible. Should we still anticipate? Obviously, the administration has thought very creatively about new positions to help facilitate residents and their needs and concerns, be it in person, over the telephone, et cetera. Are there any other changes that we should anticipate, not necessarily with physically where they are or how they operate, but in terms of user-friendly nature of residents or permit applicants engaging with the building department? I can't think of anything that would come necessarily in planning, but when we're talking about complaints for code enforcement, you've talked about the antiquated nature of sort of a dud system that's not working anymore. Which department and through which line item should we see that improvement reflected, and is that something that early on in this coming fiscal year is something that can be done, knowing that there's a lot of back-end challenges with it?
Sorry, point of privilege.
Yeah.
Is there any way to possibly decrease the air in council chambers? Or I see Ms. Borngast is already doing it.
All right. Thank you.
Early on in your
Perfect use of point of personal privilege, by the way. If we're sweltering or so you can't hear somebody, use that. That's good.
Early on in your question, I thought I understood it, but then I lost you as you went along, actually. So are you asking about staffing, or are you asking about other potential items, and are you asking specifically about the building department or the planning department, or more broadly about interfacing with the public?
I did go in many different directions, so it's an opportunity for you to be prompted about interacting with the public with broadly community development. So I'm thinking of it most directly with building and planning, since they are in that first office. But setting even aside that physical interaction, it occurred to me I'd want to know where in the budget it should be reflected, if there's any IT or programmatic way that we are being able to receive or interact with residents or applicants on the building inspection side and on the and that's now code enforcement. Building inspection, building and code enforcement. What does that look like for residents if they have a permit, they're waiting to see where it stands, or in terms of they're trying to submit a complaint about code enforcement issues?
I'll allow the deputy mayor to speak to code enforcement and the community development department writ large. The only notion that's been rattling around inside my brain, and I don't even think I've shared this with the deputy mayor, is, number one, I think we need to assess whether our telephone system is properly designed and configured to optimize customer resident interaction and experience. But number two is, it seems to me that we might want to consider a specific phone number for resident concerns, a resident concern kind of hotline. So it's one number, and you don't have to call City Hall and then hit,
Is 1-800 Pontiac available at 7?
Well, it's interesting because I was just thinking the exact same thing, but I decided not to throw it out for fear that someone else would buy it, and we'd be out of luck. So I don't know, but I was literally just thinking the same thing. But in any event, so that's the other notion that's sort of notionally in my mind right now, but we haven't really pursued it.
Anything further on that thought, Deputy Mayor, in terms of systems, and then we'll engage Mr. Wilson as well?
So just a couple of quick things there. The first is we are actually very, very fortunate to have one of the representatives in that department who is actually bilingual English and Spanish. So, we intend to continue with that. But additionally, and I'm not sure if this is what Mr. Wilson would like to speak about, but he recently shared with me a flow chart that says, "Hey, how do you get from here to here? What happens?" So we will be working on that, making sure that that is accessible online, accessible in paper format, making sure that we have that same thing in planning, which I know I've spoken with Mr. Gustafson about making sure that we have that document again in planning, making sure that all of that is accessible and easily findable on our website, which is part of the having the website upgraded. But really, when it comes to making sure that we have the proper interaction with the public, it's just going back through and making very simple, common sense changes so that people can get no one wants to come to City Hall, right? You come here because you have some administrative task to complete, and so we want to make completing those tasks as quick and easy as possible.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes, so just to touch on that, yes, it is on the website already. Just wanted to let you know. So we in the building department, when COVID started, we set up a way to email plans. So you can email plans to the building department at planreview@pontiac.mi.us. You can request inspections at pontiac.mi.us. You can also submit an application, and that's at permits@pontiac.mi.us. So we have set that up. It's working very well. All of our applications now are online with a submit button. You fill them out, it submits it, it automatically goes where it's supposed to go. So it is working very well. So we have set that up for our customers.
I must say I have yet to, in my role as District 7 City Councilperson, hear from a resident saying, "Hey, I'm not getting a response from building," or I'm waiting on a response from permits. Have any council members heard any, where the backlog is not getting the response they need? Because what I do hear is if somebody submits something on the Request for Action city website,
Right.
they get crickets, and that's
Yeah.
not limited solely to code enforcement. So again, I know I asked a lot of things, but
Or that it says at this time this concern cannot be processed, or like you're not allowed to complain about this
So I know we
particular
had some
item.
discussion about that more broadly, but should there be, is it a DPW matter or an IT matter where we're going to be looking into the functionality of bringing something that actually works?
So that's actually an IT matter, and we have actually started the process with IT. To Councilman Nicholson's point, early on, I interacted with the system just to see how it worked, and I got that. Oh, you can't. No. So yes, that is something that we do have. We have interacted with IT about to say, okay, look, we need. And so what we did was we had every department go through and ask them, are your complaint items on here? And if they're not on here, let IT know so that they can be added. And then the second step was to say, all right, so now that all of their complaint items are on here, are they mapping to the right departments? And so that's what IT is in the process of doing right now, is making sure that when someone goes on there and says, I have a problem about this, is it actually getting to the person that it needs to get to?
So are we thinking of Band-Aiding the current system or scrapping the current system?
Yes. So the current system is to be Band-Aided until we get a better system in place. And so, again, currently the DPW director is taking the lead on looking at two different systems that we have interacted with. Individuals have come in and said, hey, we want to do this for your city. And so we've looked at it, and the DPW director is taking the lead on saying, all right, the system at a bare minimum needs to do this, and then going back to those companies and saying, these are all of the things that we need your system to do, and which of you can do these things at the best cost to the city.
No pressure if it's not there yet. Okay, some pressure.
Yes.
But do we feel right now that our Band-Aid situation is fully Band-Aided at present?
No, it is not.
Okay. And do we anticipate that when there was a request for action submitted during the dark ages, when there, it was the least bandaged up, were those requests lost forever, or are they sort of accumulating and being sent to some dormant email account? Because what I heard is that, if there was a certain code enforcement, it went to some staff member's email address specifically to notify them for action or to follow up on it. But if that person is left or reassigned or et cetera, that then it just goes into the ether, or, is I'm sure IT could recall them as needed, but because I have heard citizens call and say, I submitted this thing, it was, like 2.3 years ago, I still haven't heard anything. So, and all of us are very active citizens. We know that as well because we did it over, like when the system first came on board, when it seemed like, okay, now we got something concrete to work with.
The short answer to your question, Councilman, is that I am certain something is lost in the ether. The longer answer to your question is we will have IT do an additional search to try and find, I will say, recently lost ether items.
5 years ago, I
Correct. Yeah.
anticipate is no longer essentially useful information based on how stale it is.
Yeah.
Well, but to your point, we'll go back as far as we can, and go through if whatever we can recover, however far back we can recover it, we will endeavor to do so, and then we can sort through them and have somebody go through all of them, and some of them may obviously be stale, but anything that's not obviously stale, we'll contact the person and see if it's still a problem.
Councilman Good, thank you. Councilman Goodman?
And I think a good next point to that is, you mentioned that DPW is looking at a system that will most likely better handle these in the future, correct? So I think an important thing is making sure that also in the process between moving from our current bandage system to that one, to also not lose things in the transition, because that tends to happen very often, especially at a point in our city where we're trying to get things back on track. It would be the worst timing to allow that transition to then begin to throw things off in that process. So making sure that we're taking the most care to make sure everything gets followed through upon, especially during that transition.
Very duly noted.
I'm thinking for code enforcement, and I know that it will no longer be under planning and the planning manager, but Mr. Gustafson, can you give us a sense of what our capacity currently is / the challenges that exist with 4? And that's presuming that there is a code enforcement supervisor, but are we in a position where you're able to deploy in essentially real time? Are we talking about within a matter of hours and days, or are there many code enforcement requests or complaints that you receive that with the present capacity is quite a ways out? If you can, because I'm trying to get a sense of, one, what can this further bandwidth, what does this mean in terms of will residents see a marked improvement? Because going further, I think this is the right time to share this. My hope is that a resident does not have to scream and shout about this very large blighted item that's in our street, in the right-of-way, on the sidewalk, in a yard, etc. My hope is that the city council doesn't have to be the, sort of the eyes and ears. We will always have that function. But my hope is that code officers and whatever other relationships there are with, right-of-way inspectors or engineers from the DPW, but neighborhoods have been starved for that kind of proactive attention. And I imagine it does happen, but I want to get a sense on if this puts us in a position where neighborhoods can proactively have their code enforced, there can be action taken to get results for our neighborhoods.
Excuse me. I would say that with the team of 4 that we have, particularly with, I would say, particularly code enforcement officer Tammy Cooper, she's done an incredible job of elevating the responsiveness amongst the other 3. And not just not just from a complaint on the phone or a complaint in regard from council or from the executive office. We have done, I would say, definitely starting here in end of last year, we realized it's going to take a little bit of time to beef up, and we talked quite a bit about how to prioritize and where to go and what to do. I would say that by doing so, we're probably not on the streets as much, meaning that we're more focused on those complaints that are coming in. We're not just traveling up and down the roadways as maybe we should be. And I'm hoping, well, I expect that code enforcement will be obviously the eyes and ears, so to speak, on the street, plus also taking the complaints that are coming in.
Pro Tem Carrington and then Deputy Mayor.
I think that that's a good point, Vern. But I'm gonna say something. I ain't trying to offend the department, but if I can go through my district within 40 minutes, one time a week, it's imperative that we get the code enforcement out into the community. So I see trucks driving past violations without even stopping. And the thing is that the president made a point of the citizens are getting tired of constantly looking at this blight. For example, I report things every week. I actually go down to the department and with a list, but sometimes it takes weeks and over 30 days to even for that situation to get taken care of. And sometimes within 2 weeks, I decide to clean it up because I'm tired of looking at it as a citizen myself. So the thing is that we definitely have to shorten this time of when a complaint goes in and how quick we get these things taken care of.
Sure. Okay.
And so, Councilman, that is a great point to go a little bit deeper into the president's question. So right now, the situation that you have with 4 officers is that they are understandably very reactive and not proactive. And what do I mean by that? The number of calls and complaints that come in, they're prioritizing dealing with the people who have called and said, I have this complaint. So now they're going out checking that complaint. Mm-hmm. And it's not just a matter of showing up physically, checking the complaint, checking the box, and then you're done. They then have to come back, enter that information into their computer system. They have to write letters. They have to make phone calls. They have to prepare dockets to go to Blight Court. I was actually just helping one of the code enforcement officers yesterday with an Excel issue that they were having. And that goes back to the nebulous overall project of putting $4,000 of training in because the individual was saying, oh, I have this problem and this is what's going on. And I was like, I promise you, actually, they started off by saying, I can't stand Excel, and Excel always does this to me. And I said, I promise you that whatever it is that you're trying to do in Excel, it is actually very easy and functionable. And so I had them walk through what they were doing, and we determined that the problem actually wasn't an Excel problem at all. The problem was actually a problem with the software that we use, BSNA. And again, they said, well, I need training on BSNA. And I'm like, again, we've built that into the budget, right? So those types of trainings. So once they get that training and they're not spending, because right now they're doing a very, very laborious print, copy, paste, retype to make sure that they get the right information on the docket that they need. So once we get them the training and they can actually cut that down, they'll actually be able to spend more time in the field. But when you have more officers, now you can, this will ultimately be up to the department manager to decide, but you can assign officers to be specifically proactive, you can assign officers to be specifically reactive, or just because of the amount of time that officers now have, they can better be reactive and proactive mixed together. So when you say you see individuals driving past blight, it's not that they are trying to just ignore it. It is that if you really sat down and did a ride along with them, or spend a day with them, you would say, well, I understand why you drove past that tall blighted grass, because you in the 8-hour workday, you've done 15 hours worth of work, and like you cannot do it all. And so that's why we're getting more individuals, so that we can hopefully get it all done.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, President Pro Tem. Let me just kind of cut to the core of the subject here. You're 100% right, President Pro Tem. The current approach and situation is not adequate, it's not acceptable, and blight is not getting dealt with the way it needs to be dealt with. We're acutely aware of that. Part of that challenge, as Deputy Mayor Stevens said, is needing better training. Part of it is probably having an actual code enforcement manager who's attentive 100% of the time to these issues, so that there's better, more efficient management in terms of how folks are assigned, making sure that there's accountability, making sure that somebody's staying on top of them. But the third aspect is just in terms of the amount of blight and the personnel we have, we need more personnel, and that's why we're proposing this increase in the number of positions. To get back to President McGinnis's question, which, if I understood it correctly, President McGinnis, you were asking Mr. Gustafson, if we have 4 additional code enforcement officers, will that be adequate to actually catch up on all the blight that's been backlogged, if you will, and start to finally be proactive, so that rather than residents having to complain about blight and spot it and identify it for us, rather than them calling the mayor's office and calling city council people 100 times a day, will we have code enforcement officers who are out there patrolling on their own, identifying the blight and nipping it in the bud and addressing it promptly? I don't know what the answer is. So, Mr. Gustafson, are you able to answer that question?
Let's see. I guess from my standpoint, in regards to what I'm saying, I would say by allowing us, with the number of code enforcement officers that we're suggesting, it will help in being very efficient and being that level of much more productivity, be proactive in many situations, particularly in regards to if we're allowing in regards to, looking at it like, say, 1 per district, them focused on not just in regards to code enforcement, but also you're looking at rental inspections and so forth. Yes.
I'm gonna take your word on that.
Well, it won't be under him.
Okay. That's right. He's moving into another department now.
Right.
Yes, okay.
Well, I think we're all going to be under one big umbrella, aren't we?
One big happy community development.
That's right.
Councilman Nicholson.
I may have a different experience. I interact with Tammy on a very regular basis, and here she gives me a lot of feedback about what she did in my district. And I think that really caters to the question of pairing a council person with a code enforcement officer, them, one, being able to really understand who are the landlords, where are those the people that just never cut their grass? Where are the vacant properties? I mean, there are some scenarios where it's really difficult to. We had a situation this week where Tammy went and enforced on a property where in District 2 there's lots of shared driveways between 2 houses. This house was torn down. This house is full of cars that are unregistered and have flat tires. When they go to enforce, there's a driveway and a house. There's an address. Then there's a vacant lot. It doesn't appear that those cars belong to the vacant lot, that you would assume those cars belong to the house that has the driveway. So I knew immediately that had happened, that it was reacted to within hours, because the very next day, the wrong resident received the notification. So, I mean, it's to say that it is being. And when I call in things, I know I've had plenty of feedback that thank you for doing that, and it's within 24, 48 hours. Mm-hmm. And she does give me a lot of feedback. I think communication will be the key between the council person and the code enforcement officer once we do have someone that's paired with each one of us, because they can relate, hey, I drove past this one, FYI, I've got this ticket out, I've got this letter out, I've got this notice out. And I think something to answer too. There have been times where I've been very frustrated that this hasn't been done, but there is the ordinance requires a notice or a warning in some cases. You can't just apply a ticket.
That's correct.
So that, I don't want to say you're not being proactive. Sometimes you are, but you're stuck in the process.
That's correct. I mean, like, typically the violations, and as Mike knows this too, I mean, you go in and you send them a notice violation in roughly 7 days. You give them, you go back and re-inspect it, and that's generated on their triptych that day to come back and re-inspect it. Then we can start to issue the next ticket, and then again, there's days in advance and so forth, going from 100 to 3 to 500.
Yeah, I'll add another layer to that too, if I could, Councilman Nicholson, because you raise a good point about the benefits of pairing a code enforcement officer with a council person. And of course, having 8 code enforcement officers allows us to do that, and then to have either a roving code enforcement officer or a code enforcement officer specifically for downtown, or there are a number of different ways the 8th code enforcement officer could be utilized. But the other item I'll just say, which is helpful from our perspective, is having one assigned to each council district will help in terms of accountability for the staff. Because we know then that if code enforcement isn't getting properly addressed in a district, there's one person responsible for that. It's not a situation where, code enforcement as a whole was supposed to deal with it, but I don't really know who didn't get it done in the division. And so I think it's very helpful to have an understanding of anything in this geographic territory is this person's responsibility. And as council people work directly with staff, council people can provide us feedback too in the executive branch about what your experience has been like working with that code enforcement officer. So that's a very appealing aspect of this to me as well.
Pro Tem Carrington?
Well, it definitely goes back to being more proactive instead of reactive. Because, for example, I work all day, so I definitely can't call a code enforcement officer every day. Now, I try to do it every 3 days when I get a big enough list. So I definitely need the code to be more proactive in driving through the district that they work in.
Point well taken. Yep.
Other discussion? So we've delved into planning, we've delved into building, and we now are at economic development. And as we've demonstrated, we might segue back into some more building and planning fun when we're thinking about it.
In the agenda, I believe it's still code enforcement.
Oh, okay.
Yep, code enforcement.
There we go. Let's look at an agenda here. So we've dealt with planning, we've dealt with building, and we've talked a great deal about code enforcement, but want to give the administration floor. Is there anything specifically you'd like to elucidate further?
So there is nothing further to actually discuss. Just pointing out something that I think I pointed out earlier in the hearings, that when we're doing this planning next year, you won't see this broken out like this. You'll see community development, but unless you ask to have it broken out like this. So I'll use the clerk's office again as an example. We think about the clerk's office, but the clerk's office is actually broken down into elections and marijuana and a couple of other different subsectors. So community development is currently broken down into these different subsections. And code enforcement, which we've already talked about all of the, hey, how many people are going to be there and what are they going to be doing? All of this cost, even though you see it here as $960,313, that's actually been moved and is part of the building department fund, but all of that is underneath the umbrella of community development.
So for code enforcement citations, where has the revenue been housed, and where will it be? Will it be now generated into the building inspection fund?
That is correct.
Has it been previously?
No, it has not.
So in the past, it's been general fund revenue, just as the code enforcement expenses have been general fund expenses. Moving it into the building fund, both code enforcement revenue and code enforcement expenses will be building fund items.
Pro Tem Carrington?
So, what's the projection of how much that brings in on a yearly basis?
I will actually have to
Okay,
get
no
that.
problem.
Yeah, okay.
If you don't have that, you can.
No, I don't have it in front of me.
But that'll be helpful for us. It's another barometer to say, is this new, more expanded capacity bearing fruit? Is it generating, enforcement? We're tracking it geographically, we're tracking it, ideally with some sort of tracking database, but we could also be gauging, is it leading to real revenue into this fund?
So there's a double-edged sword to that.
Yeah.
So yes. Initially, that will be a great barometer. But if it is actually as successful as we hope it will be, it
No
will
code violations to some?
it will cannibalize itself because the word and the reputation will be that when you get that first warning, the city will follow up and you will get your citation. So individuals will be less likely to get to the point of receiving tickets.
I have a resident, want to give a shout out to Ms. Landry on South Marshall. She is very keen on some other municipalities. They have such rigorous code that if you rake your leaves into a pile, it is a code violation if you don't then immediately bag or dispose of those leaves. And I'm not saying that's the outcome we want. I'm just saying that reputation that some other municipalities have, it leads to property owners, whether they be owner occupants or investment property owners. It demonstrates to them, to your very point, that this is the standard in Pontiac neighborhoods. The standard will be enforced, and it will be, there's not a lot of latitude or time. We're not talking months before there's action. It could be minutes. Other discussion on Legislative Council Sharp and then Councilman Nicholson?
In terms of blight court, obviously it was reduced by 75,000. So I would assume that those other costs were for startup costs, and that the remaining 15 is that just for the cost of the magistrate?
I think the situation is that 90,000 was budgeted, but very little of that has been spent, such that the assumption has been that we vastly, and by we, I mean the previous administration, previous council, vastly over budgeted for the item. But Mr. Gustafson, do you have some insight?
I think between the mayor and Ms. Sharp, you are correct. In looking back, basically, as just basically magistrate costs, and that's where it's coming down to about $15,000 a year. Yeah.
And my last question, because you've kind of created this new entity, with the other professional services, the increase is 80,000. So what does that consist of?
Other professional services, a good point. That $150,000, what we did was we bumped up, that would include abatements, like emergency abatements. That was $100,000. And also we instituted the snow emergency. So we added like $50,000 for that. Snow emergencies related to sending out notices and getting the code enforcement out there in regards to the downtown and commercial areas in regards to snow plowing their sidewalks or shoveling their sidewalks.
So for those of you watching at home, or for those council people who weren't familiar with this, as I was not familiar with this until recent months, what happens is when Mr. Gustafson talks about budgeting more money for abatements, that means that if somebody has a code violation, let's say they haven't cut their grass, let's say they have a giant pile of garbage in their yard, not leaves, Mr. President, but garbage, and we don't just issue a citation, we then go out and we hire a lawn mowing company to mow the grass that's too long, or we hire a contractor to go out and pick up the garbage. And then we bill the property owner for that cost of abating that nuisance. And so hopefully, we hope that we'll ultimately get that money back through a collection process. But in the short term, we need to budget more funds so that we can pay those contractors. And in the long term, hopefully we get that money back, but some people aren't very collectible. So in some instances, we may not get that money back. So that's what Mr. Gustafson's referring to when he says we have to budget more for abatement.
Right.
The administration's strategy is to be more
Yes.
aggressive on that abatement process.
Exactly.
That way the results
Right.
are borne out. For
Exactly.
Like right now, we just released some last dollars for abatements, and we have spent $70,000 in regards to abatements across the city in regards to garbage and other debris and towing of vehicles and RVs and everything else you could imagine.
Do you mean that is sort of fiscal year to date, or that's just a recent spurt?
No, that was to date.
Okay.
So the $100,000, that's why we bumped it up to that level. And I do ask in regards to under mowing services, I would ask, the council and also the executive office to relook at that. I know that we talked quite extensively, well, you will be, I'm not too sure in regards to DPW doing the public areas, but code enforcement will be in regards to private properties. And that's where, right now, we're in the throes, as we all know, in regards to mowing of private property. Once the violation, and once they don't do that, we start to get our mowing contractor out there to cut that grass.
On that. Just a FYI, the previous council, because that was a big issue, they put additional funds in for that.
Correct.
Thank you.
So I'm just looking at the mayor's recommended budget of only 10,000. So I didn't know if there was the thought that maybe now DPW is going to be handling private property in regards to mowing services, or is that something that?
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah. So the thought, your point is well taken because of the timing, but the thought is that with us bringing the additional DPW people in-house, we would be able to do those abatements in-house.
Oh,
But
perfect.
but again, timing reasons, we really won't be able to do it in-house until next summer, not this summer. So, yes.
So the administration may want to just notate that might be something we want to. Thank you, Mr. Gustafson, for elevating that question. Does others wish to have the floor? Pro Tem?
Hey, Vern, before you sit down, just a quick question. Also, when you guys actually going out to, for example, some of our seniors have code enforcement issues when they have just the house is definitely unlivable, trash is everywhere, and so how are y'all dealing with those situations? Are y'all actually moving the senior out to like an overnight stay so their family can come in and clean out those homes?
Has a property been condemned due to the inhabitability?
I guess I guess it depends on the level. Most recent, I think everybody knows about the house on Spence Street. That there took quite a bit of effort in regards between Mike Wilson, the fire department, Lighthouse, and others to basically. And Tammy and everybody else was there to basically deal, and also our abatement contractor, which we had retained. He was abating the property, obviously realized that the family was in desperate needs and got that family out. And working with the county's Child Protective Services was able to do that. So it evolved from just a simple, but an abatement situation into preserve.
Well, definitely,
that
and
family.
I definitely like to kudos to the staff for
I know.
all those extra activities they done to take
Yeah.
care of that situation.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So is that somewhere in the budget where you guys had a type of fund, or are you guys using outside organizations to?
Well, actually, it started off as just like I said, a simple abatement. But then by making the phone calls that we did, particularly with Tammy, and then obviously with the sheriff that was with us, realized the severe issues that were going on in the home, that they realized they had to get that family out. And that's when other calls were made to Lighthouse.
Thank you.
Councilman Goodman.
Oh, actually,
I skipped Nicholson. I'm sorry. Councilman Nicholson.
So my question is similar to Council President Pro Tem's. So I have heard a few times, well, this person can't afford to mow their grass, and then the abatement is an option. But to me, that just sort of compounds that problem, and we then end up with a. So I think it is important for us to either assign some resource to that community support effort, that social work capacity scenario, or take that stone cold route and have a policy that says we can't consider those things or those factors, because it creates, to me, an equality issue that we assign tickets to people who we believe, we're not doing any financial assessment, can or can't do the work or can or can't afford to do the work. I don't think that we're qualified to make that assessment when we are knocking on someone's door. I know a lot of people who appear to not be financially stable, but they do have finances, or they are set up in a way that can support themselves. So I do know that I don't want to assign a ticket to this person because of their particular circumstance. Well, and then we just end there, and the neighbors are still in that scenario. I know of actual situations like this that have happened. I also have questions, and this is maybe not budget related on that piece, but I think it's along the same lines of when we do know that there is a house where somebody has maybe compulsive hoarding disorder and they have filled their house and is an unsafe situation. From my understanding, we can't just enter someone's house. So I have in the past dealt with that by calling Adult Protective Services and started the process there. Now, I don't know if APS calls the city to say this is what we found. We found an unsafe building. Director Wilson, do you hear from the state or resources like that saying?
Once in a while, we'll receive a call.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of hit and miss.
So what are the other processes, or the way that if we know this is happening, if we have credible, word that this is going on, what are our, other than calling Adult Protective Services, does Building and Safety step in? Will code enforcement, you found out this house on Spence.
Right. That was because of the severe abatement that was around.
There was something outside that you were able to see from the street.
Correct. And knowing the fact, and because we knew that there was an occupant within that home, that's why the sheriff was with us.
Mm-hmm.
So then the sheriff was trying and talking with the occupant and finding out there was a number of small children, and it just became
And allowed access to the home.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that's, to me, I think it creates this, potentially, to me, there's an area of liability that you have to think about, where
There is.
we've got some people we're assessing or we're making that determination, should we or shouldn't we, if this person can't afford to mow their grass, fix up their house. There are plenty of houses that just look bad, right? Peeling paint, shingles hanging, and they're not necessarily it's an eyesore, and there is a code for that. But do we apply that? Because, there's a house on on Cherokee that for years, and now, unfortunately, the person passed away, and we've got a different set of circumstances to play by. But that house for years had trees growing in and out of it, and, and maybe it wasn't a structural issue that we had to contend with, but it certainly was an eyesore. But the answer to me was always given, this person just can't simply afford to keep up their house, and what do we do? Let's throw up our hands. So that's why I want to understand, how do we resource and provide support to that?
Well, I agree with you, Councilman, and so, Mr. Gustafson, are you saying that tickets or citations were not issued to that person when they otherwise would have because they were deemed to be low income?
No, not at all. I'm just saying that there was no response in regards to that, so we took it upon ourselves in regards to abate that property on Spence.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then it started.
So I guess what I'm wondering, Councilman, is I agree with what you said, but what is what you said grounded in? Do you believe that is
Word
happening?
from specific code enforcement officers telling me I don't know what to do because this person can't afford it anyway. So that to me is like, are we making a strong statement that regardless of what we believe someone's financial status to be, we are going to assess the fines?
It is our administration's position that we will assess the fines, period.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that we can't put in place some programs through CDBG dollars or other means to enable people to access the resources they need to make needed home improvements. We also strongly believe that we should do that. But when people's property is in disrepair and is derelict and is creating nuisances on other people, our position is that we are to issue citations,
I
period.
think-
So to the extent that there are code officers who are sending you other signals, we need to talk offline
I
about
think
that,
they
because that's a
all
big
need-
problem from my
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, I think they all need to be made aware of that. That is what the word is. My question related to the budget, and maybe it's CDBG and it's a separate conversation, is I think when we're going out and giving those fines and tickets, that there should be information about those services, because then I get the call and I will, of course, help them find access to those services, but I'm not a social worker, so I don't have the full breadth and expertise in what those programs and what's available. I think we hit a lot of roadblocks. So yes, I think we need to have a conversation broadly with all of the code enforcement officers that is the administration's take, because I can promise you it's not been levied across the board.
Councilman Goodman.
So to go on both of my colleagues' points, I think there should be and needs to be, honestly, a concerted effort from City Hall across the board to better address these issues. Because as President Pro Tem said, there are many different situations in which people who are receiving these violations and these fines simply cannot afford them. As a person who not only has knocked doors in my entire district and also knocked doors in other districts as part of my job, I have talked to multiple different people who have been in situations where they are simply and will not be in any financial position to handle actual fines. And while I do understand the point of making sure that we apply rules equally across the board, just from a legal and logistical standpoint, there has to be actual work done by the city to make sure that we are acknowledging the material conditions of most of our residents who, in many cases, cannot afford large repairs or abatements in some way. And so we need to do our part to make sure that we're finding resources where we can and making sure that's communicated, but also providing them when we're capable. Yeah. If there are ever ways to properly fund some ways to help these lower income residents address their properties, we need to, because it's very clear to us how our city is and the situations that many people face. So we have to be not only professional in what we do, but we also have to recognize the entirety of our city's conditions, not just from a paper or from a money perspective.
I totally agree. I would make an initial observation, which is that most of our residents are renters, and so it's not their obligation to maintain the property when it comes to these issues. It's landlords, and I think most of the blight in our community is due to landlords who are not properly maintaining the property, as well as some commercial establishments. So that's number one. Number two, we do have a lot of owner-occupied housing where the residents can't afford to make the improvements. And one of the reasons, and I've said this publicly and privately before, we need to bring our CDBG dollars back in-house is because in addition to technically what's the community development block grant dollars, there's also home funds, that's an acronym, home funds, that are available to allow residents to make those home improvements. And currently, those are being pooled with the county's home funds, and we're not getting our fair share of those home funds to assist our residents with making those needed home repairs. And so one of the major reasons why we need to bring back in-house our CDBG dollars is that more of our owner-occupied residents can access those funds to assist them to make needed home repairs. So I completely agree with you, Councilman. But the way to do that isn't by being lenient on the issuing of citations. It's to make sure that residents have access to the funds they need to make the repairs to their home so that they never get citations in the first place.
And I agree with that. And I think one of the other things that you bring up in what you said is a lot of these situations fall on commercial properties in some way or upon landlords. And I think one of the ways that we also solve this problem is by making sure that we are actually enforcing and collecting upon the things in which we are seeking out. I think there are multiple times from the past mayor's administration where those fines and fees were forgiven and not collected upon. And there are very well times where that money over the course of an administration over multiple years will have likely created some sustaining funding and a way to be able to create those programs in addition to what already exists to better provide for our community. So I agree with you that we shouldn't necessarily be more lenient. However, we need to make sure that we're actually going after the people who are bad faith actors, because we have a fair share of those who are simply skating by the rules, and it's drastically affecting the quality of life for the people who are not only in a position where they need to make those abatements and can't, but it's creating a problem across our entire city that's not being addressed and is really spiraling out of control as long as we don't really address those people.
Strongly agree.
Councilman Parker?
Mr. Gupson, I just have one question, really. How do we handle those who, for whatever reason, the owner of the property has died, and so there's nobody to talk with or communicate with other than the neighbors who surround them, who's complaining about the appearance of the property in the beginning? How do we deal with those type of issues?
There was recently there was a house, I think it was in Councilman Nicholson's area, and we've tried to reach out to, looking back in regards to certain deeds, in regards to where the property came from, in regards to see if there was any type of possibility of, in regards to any type of extended family somewhere. I don't know the end result of that, but we try our very best to try to find out who in next in kin, because of that person had passed on, and try to resolve it as much as possible.
Deputy Mayor?
So that's a great question. The simple short answer to that is it goes to the executor of the estate.
Okay. Most of us don't have one.
No. Yeah. So the executor. So if the individual did not leave an actual executor, that's why I said the simple short answer is that it goes to the executor of the estate. If you did not leave an executor, the county will end up taking the property and becoming the executor of the estate, and they would get the notification and the bill and the tax. But it falls on it. It goes to the estate.
Or, as former Councilman Miller pointed out, it could go back to the bank too, if there's a mortgage on it.
Yeah, but I mean, that's still the ultimately the estate in the case of someone who's deceased. But your point is well taken, which is, if it's a bank, that may be one thing, but typically these situations are often tantamount to being uncollectible, where it would cost more money to actually collect than you'd actually end up collecting. So that is a common problem and challenge with code enforcement, which is one of the reasons, among others, that we spend more on code enforcement than we realize in revenue.
Yeah, this property has got everything going on at the same time. It's in tax foreclosure, it's in probate. We're trying to help get some of that information too. It's locked up 3 different ways, and it is falling apart.
Are there certain codes? These are code officers, code enforcement. Are there certain sets of codes that we don't have the capacity with this current framework presently, or even as we look prospectively, that we simply can't get around? Are there any sets of our codes that are very difficult to enforce because of just the complexity of the nature? And then that'll lead to my second question, but anything?
No, not that I'm aware of. I know that, property maintenance codes and everything else between regards to what building looks at and then what code enforcement does. Nothing that's too egregious.
So this segues to my next question. What is presently our code as it relates to chickens and chicken coops? For I have gotten residents that have asked me, and what's the scoop from the code enforcement side?
And I have it in my zoning ordinance, go figure. You can't have a rooster, no roosters, okay? And depending on the size of your parcel, I think you're up to either 2 or 3. Then if you have a larger parcel, you can have, I think, maybe a couple more.
So zoning spells that out?
Yeah, it does.
Because there is, I think it's animals. There's a section
Yes,
in our
animals.
code that, is it incongruent or it's outdated?
No.
Yeah, there's one on municipal and one on zoning, and they both talk about chickens. One says none, and the other one says
I think municipal lists
some.
chickens as, they list many different types of animals is not permitted and chickens is included in that. So
Just the latest example as to why we're allocating funds towards ordinance review and ordinance amendments.
Exactly.
But so thank you for that.
No
It gives me
roosters.
more context.
Yeah.
So presently, do code enforcement get many chicken calls?
We have, and you should, there's probably some pictures out there that shows a couple of code enforcement officers wrangling a couple of chickens. Patrice Waterman, as a matter of fact, former councilwoman, had quite a few in her neighborhood, and we were able to take them out to a farm north of here in Orion Township.
And when we talk about animals, if there is an issue with, let's say, a dangerous animal, what presently is happening? What's that look like on sort of the practical application of it? The previous council put money, it's in the council's budget,
Correct.
100,000, but what's the current contract with Oakland County Animal Control? What does and it does not cover, and which budget might we see that reflected?
Yeah, so I don't believe, and Deputy Mayor and Mr. Carrington, correct me, I don't think there's a contract with Oakland County Animal Control. I believe that because I think it's one of two, I think they supposedly and are supposed to be providing those services to us, either because we're a community that is patrolled by the Sheriff's Department, or alternatively because they're supposed to be providing those services to all of Oakland County, regardless of the community. There's been some concern around whether they're really providing robust services and what that looks like. And I know that there's been discussion in the past about trying to bolster that through some sort of allocation of funds. We're open to having that conversation. I know that a member of the public mentioned that the evening that I unveiled my budget, that the only concern that they noted at the time was that we did not allocate some additional funds towards animal control. And so we're open to having that conversation. I think we all appreciate setting aside fowl, and by that I mean chickens or other birds, that we do have a real need for better animal control here in the community. That includes dogs. It also includes an enormous stray cat population. And so, you know, in terms of the best way to handle and address that, we're very open-minded.
If you can, and so when we get to economic development, we might be able to segue into that. It's worth us having just a practical policy conversation about that during the budget cycle, since this is the time maybe to make some budget accommodations if needed, because there's just different layers of action, right? So like I've had residents, before I even started, there was a carcass, a deer carcass on Auburn Avenue. I tried to, on their behalf, call animal control. They said, no, we don't do that.
They don't.
DPW.
So that's a DPW issue.
Okay.
And so I know that the county, for example, if there's an animal carcass on a county road in the county right of way, that's a road commission issue. And I think the vast majority of municipalities, when it comes to city roads, it's a DPW issue. So it's again, a right of way issue. And it's both unsightly, but it can be dangerous if they're in the roadway. So that definitely is a DPW issue. But what I would suggest is that we internally on the executive branch side make sure we have a fuller understanding of what services, even if they're not adequate, what services the county animal control currently provides, and what we think might make sense in terms of trying to bolster some of those services, and then maybe put it on the agenda for a regular council meeting, if you deem it appropriate, Mr. President, for a discussion item, in the next few weeks here, while the budget cycle is still in play here, so that we can jointly make a decision as to what makes sense in terms of a budget adjustment.
Apart from the enforcement of chicken coop zoning, Are there other animal action that involves code enforcement that comes to mind?
That's probably that and dogs and cats, but primarily it's the chickens become.
What does code enforcement do related to dogs and cats? The number in a
They do try to report it to animal control.
in terms of those that are stray or those that are being mistreated?
Strays primarily, yeah.
Council President.
Does
The county.
do building inspectors ever have to, or rental inspectors ever have to notify authorities when it comes to inhumane conditions inside of a home when it relates to animals? Go for it.
Yeah. Extensive conversation.
Yeah, the county comes.
Thank you. With the previous administration, we spent quite a bit of time on the dangerous animal situation, and as a result of that, reached out to Oakland County to see what they do and what they don't do. First of all, there's a time frame, so they only work between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. So if there's a situation during the weekends, they can't accommodate that. Then with regard to dangerous animals, because an animal or a dog is someone's property, they can't just go and pick up a stray animal. The animal has to have caused some harm to another person. If in the event that they do pick up an animal, then there's a time frame, like I think 5 or 7 days that they can hold that animal, and then the owner can come and pick them up. But we did spend some time looking into what they provide. And of course, they feel like the county, they have limited capacity as well. So they were looking to the city to supplement their services. And that's pretty much where it stands right now. As you stated, there's $100,000 that the city council has, for dangerous animals. Our city attorney actually looked at ordinances for other communities. One specifically was Farmington Hills, to see if that was a community that we wanted to adopt their ordinance. But again, as the mayor, stated that we probably could, come back and revisit this situation.
Sure, if you could pull the relevant information and provide that to the
Council.
administration.
Council President.
Thank you.
Councilman Parker.
So before you go, Ms. Lynette. So as we talked about that, and certainly we know about cats and dogs, but does this include also wild animals?
I didn't hear you.
Does it include wild animals like raccoons and possums and
It
bats?
is related to, right, dangerous animals, and I don't remember specifically which ones. Again, as the mayor stated that if there's a carcass, if it's on county property, there's a certain, process of which they go about. But it was more than dogs and cats, yes.
Okay.
Other questions in terms of code enforcement? This has been a very illuminating process that sometimes goes beyond just the budget that we're talking about, but it's helpful for us to have a full perspective on what we're dealing with. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, we're now looking at economic development, which is right now booked as redevelopment and housing.
Redevelopment, housing, economic development, 6 one, half dozen of the other. You can't have economic development if people don't have houses. And housing is economic development. So in this budget, what you will see is we currently have a manager in the department, as you just heard from Lynette. But this also represents a large change from the format that we have right now. So going back to the idea about community development block grant. Currently, the city contracts out to the county for administration of the community development block grant dollars, which means that the county is the responsible contracting entity with the federal government for those funds. The county then allows the city to schedule 4 community development block grant projects a year. And those projects are managed through the Economic Development Department. In the upcoming fiscal year, though, those funds have, how to put it? The award for community development block grant that will be beginning to be spent this calendar year The previous council voted to have all of that money go toward sidewalk repair. And so what will be happening this year, unless this council decides to review and reallocate those funds to something else, Lynette will be administering the contract to make sure that all of that happens. Actually, no, it will not be Lynette, because by the time those funds get spent, community development block grant will be moved to the grants department. But in years past, what would have happened is the economic development director would administer those contracts, but would not actually be the one who was responsible for communicating with the federal government and making sure that we are hitting all of those federal responsibilities.
So other professional services, that's what that was, CDBG?
That should be what that was.
Okay.
Because that is gone now, correct?
It just decreased.
Yeah. But that is a large change. The community development block grant is no longer being administered out of this fund. The other change is we are actually increasing headcount, and so we are bringing on a small business development person. And the idea there is really simple. To have a proper economic development department, you cannot be passive. You build, it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of your growth is going to come from your existing businesses. And so you have to have a policy and a program for how you're getting out to those existing businesses and talking to them and dealing with them proactively, finding out what their challenges are and trying to come up with resources to meet those challenges. The way our department is put together right now, that's just not happening because there's just not capacity there to do that. So those are the major changes that are being suggested here. One of the things that you don't see here that we have not fully come to fruition with yet is we know that we need more funds towards special activities. And so what do I mean by that? We know that we have businesses that don't have good access to capital. And so how do we do that? One of the ways we can do that, again, would be if we had control of our community development block grant dollars, we could do what are called Section 108 loans. Currently, Oakland County has a policy that they won't do Section 108 loans. So having our CDBG dollars back in house is something that we can do. Additionally, we do have the Grants and Philanthropy Department, which will be looking for bringing in additional resources that could then be assigned to the Economic Development Department division to then partner with banking institutions to get those funds out there and provide our institutions with the capital that they need.
Deputy, if I could, I think what President McGinnis is referring to when he says other professional services is the activity to date, roughly, of $101,730. I don't think that has anything to do with administering CDBG dollars.
No,
and in fact, I'm not sure why we would have an actual expense for administering CDBG dollars when they're being administered by the county. So I just want to make sure we're accurately answering President McGinnis's question.
Thank you, Mayor.
If I could, please, and thank you. Within the Economic Development Department budget, that $50,000 for other services, other professional services, are actually for consulting services. As Deputy Mayor alluded, economic development, we, in terms of being limited in terms of our staffing capacity, but we want to offer other, not just programs, but other resources. Our responsibilities include attraction and retention of our employers. Then our small businesses is another component of our activities in economic development. So if we want to provide, for instance, some services to our small businesses, it could be consulting services perhaps with maybe a Michigan State University for nutritional labeling, or, to help them with that aspect of their business. It could be some service with another professional organization that we want to get some consulting services for. We actually have some membership fees in here. Now, you don't see the MEDC, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, or SIMCOG as members that we want to associate with, but they have resources and programs that might not necessarily be free of charge. So in our efforts to accommodate our employers, our businesses, our small businesses, we may need some consulting services fee, and that's where that $50,000 is from.
So, Ms. Phillips, what was the $101,730 that has been spent to date in terms of professional services?
I would have to defer to our CFO. Our department has not spent any money in that
Well,
capacity.
could that be Matt Gibb?
I can't speak to that because it's nothing I authorized. I don't know.
Okay. Mr. Carrington?
I'm pretty sure it's not Matt Gibb. I'm almost certain in one of the attorney categories. I'll have to look that up, Mayor.
Okay.
Find out what that activity is.
Okay. And just for council's understanding, we have not utilized any services of Mr. Gibbs since sometime in January, just so everyone's clear on that.
Well, that definitely was.
And
the next
I'm going to
question.
say,
That
in
was the next
I
question.
haven't been here quite 2 years yet, but my department has not spent any money on consulting services
I don't want
that
to,
I've authorized.
that you've authorized is
Yes.
what you're saying. Clearly, your department, as indicated on the ledger, I'm not saying you've authorized it, but clearly the ledger indicates that about $101,730 was spent under the umbrella of your department. I'm not
That's
saying
true.
I'm not saying you authorized it necessarily, but Mr. Carrington, if you can find out what that was for and inform council, that would be great.
Thank you, Mayor Grammel. Councilman Nicholson.
This budget reminds me a little bit of Youth Rec because there's so many holes for the accounts that we're looking at. So I want to understand where some of these things may have moved to or where we'll see them, like the TIF contributions.
So the TIF contributions, I believe we just moved to general fund.
Yeah, we moved them out of, they were previously in general fund in economic development, redevelopment out. We moved them out of that department. They're still in general fund. We just placed them into a separate.
And the
Okay.
and the rationale behind that is economic development is definitely where tax increment financing should take place and occur. However, we are no longer actively running tax increment finance districts, and so putting those underneath the auspices of economic development gave a incomplete and incorrect picture of what was happening there. So those are now legacy funds that are just being paid off.
So I see we have currently have a relationship with the Iron Mountain, but we've been storing a lot of things in the basement. Does that relationship continue? Because I haven't seen any dollars associated to Iron Mountain for the next fiscal year.
No. So that is a great question. My understanding is that we are not currently. I have not seen any bills from Iron Mountain, but that is something that I will be looking into further. But I believe that it is not our intent to continue housing anything at Iron Mountain.
Okay. So there was minor things in.
If I could just amplify that answer, we'll look into the specifics around Iron Mountain, but I believe that Iron Mountain was retained or was going to be retained for purposes of electronically scanning documents perhaps. So I don't know if it was storage
document
necessarily or if it was other forms or services of document retention. To my knowledge, none of that has occurred since we took office in January. But we will find out what funds have been spent in recent years on Iron Mountain, if any, and make sure that we provide that detail and information to council.
Why is there no expense for life insurance?
That is based on the current elections of
Oh, it's
what
a-
individuals are.
Okay. Odd, okay. So so if someone chooses to elect life insurance, I'm sorry, I've worked in HR now for a long time and I don't understand how that happens. How does that work?
So there are two different benefits. One is there's an employer paid component, and then there is a supplemental component of life insurance. And so additionally, there was some accounting that was being done where we try and effectively impute the cost of the employer provided. And so there were certain instances. That's why you in the past you've seen these small amounts where they were attempting to quantify exactly what the value of the employer provided life insurance benefit was. Going forward, we've been advised that we don't necessarily need to do that, and so that's why we're trying to clean that up from an accounting standpoint. But in short, there's in answering your question, there's two types of life insurance benefits. One is going to be employer provided at no cost to the employee, and then employees do have the ability to get supplemental, and that's what they're.
So there's an
they're charged for.
employer provided benefit. It's not free, so there's a cost to that. But it's not associated with the department. Is there a lump sum that's in another
We
budget?
captured that in the insurance within the insurance fund.
Within the insurance fund.
Correct.
What does that mean?
So we there's a separate part in the budget where we house all of the medical and insurance costs within the budget.
So it's combined with medical.
Correct. It's combined within the insurance fund with all of the costs that are included in that.
Where is that? What budget is that in?
When would we be looking further into it? Would it be under finance?
The idea is when we cover the finance
Finance.
department.
Okay. Thank you.
TIFA 2 and TIFA 3, how long are these legacy costs going to float out around our taxpayers' necks?
Director Carrington, TIF 2, I believe we discussed was 2 more years.
Yeah,
and-
I've got that information.
Okay.
Give me 1 second.
2 and 4. Yeah.
Councilman Goodman, did I see your hand?
So I just want to follow up on a couple of just numbers. So the first one I see, I'm looking at the computer equipment budget. I'm just inquiring as to why, with likely the increase of people in this department, where it seems that the computer equipment recommended amount is slightly, $6,000 more than the department requested budget, and then what was budgeted last time. I just wanted to just inquire about that, if there's any reason for it specifically.
And which line item is that?
That would be 101,690,731.003. And I know we're like getting into like literal smaller thousands of dollars, but
No. So I just need to see the number. So that's based on the thought of what do we actually need to buy in order to bring in a new person, and so that's how you got that number there.
Because 2 of the employees are currently on staff, and so that's why we
thank you. And
decreased that amount. And if I could, on the question for TIFA, so the TIFA 2, those payments come to an end in 2024. So we have 2 more this coming fiscal year and 1 additional fiscal year. And then TIFA 3, those payments go on until 2031.
What fun thing did TIFA 3 bring us?
So TIFA 3 encompasses the northern portion, well, northeastern end of the city. So the Stonegate development has TIFA $3 in it. And then there was also a development that never actually came to fruition, just north of the Collier Road landfill and south of Great Lakes Crossing.
So neither of those incorporate the Center Point Marriott or any
Center Point Marriott is TIFA 2.
two. Okay. Well, at least one of them will be sunsetting soon. Councilman Parker, then Councilman Goodman. Councilman Goodman.
So the next one I have a question on is services membership dues. Is there? I'm just following through on the ones that have larger differences between previously budgeted and recommended versus what is the requested versus recommended. So if we look at 101-690-807-000, budgeted for last year was 7.5, requested was 17, almost 18,000, and this the recommended amount is 1,800. And I just wanted to know if there's any specific reason for that. I'm just following through.
Yeah. So I will defer first to Director Phillips and then chime in.
Yeah, there's a few organizations that our department wants to be members of, but some of the larger ones, such as the MEDC and SIMCOG, who have, 8,000 for MEDC and about the same amount of money for SIMCOG, we don't necessarily have to be members of them to benefit from their resources. But the smaller ones, like the International Economic Development Council, MEDA, the Urban Land Council, I think that's another acronym. But those are ones that we want to pay the fees for and be members of, and then that way we can have access to their workshops, their courses, and the larger ones. And then again, that's why we ask for funding in our, for our consulting fees. We may want to take advantage of some other programs that aren't necessarily free, or again, back to the consulting, we may want to reach out and have some other consulting services. We're really trying to be prudent in terms of how we're going about expanding our services and our resources. Another component, or another in terms of economic development, we have about 25 partners that we work with on various levels. And so through our partners, it affords us the capacity to try to, be more accessible to our employers here in the city that employ, our Pontiac residents, as well as our small businesses.
So I guess the follow-up question I'll ask for that, just for my own sake. So the number is intentionally that much smaller on purpose?
Yes.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, did you want to add to that? Okay.
Other discussion? It has been shared at the subcommittee level that the fee schedule that's broken, incorporated into this budget proposal for the administration involves the decreasing of the business license fee in the city of Pontiac in order to make it more accessible, but then expand the number of businesses that act on that fulfill that annual requirement. Have you done, or is it readily available, what the projections are in terms of what's the immediate lost revenue from that, and what do we want to try and what do we anticipate based on sort of casting a broader net? Will it make up for that balance?
So we had approximately 600 businesses registered paying that $160 fee, but we actually have over 1,500 small businesses that we would ask to pay the new $50 fee. And then, of course, there would be an annual renewal rate. So we're not looking at it, and I haven't actually done the analysis of what if all that additional 800 businesses, what if they paid that $160 fee? They're probably not going to do it. And I say that because they don't really see what the benefit is. The ones that actually pay the fee have a brick and mortar where they need the inspection. We have a lot of businesses that are home-based, that are maybe a mobile, business or, just more or less under the radar. So we're looking that if we have everyone register, then first of all, we know who they are, but not just so we know who they are, we want to take them to the process where they're actually paying themselves taxes, hiring other people who would pay taxes, and that is a way that we're looking to increase our revenue base. We're also looking at it as a way that through having a business that, people are not unemployed, but they are actually thriving, and that would help our community, that we have more businesses, we have more services, and there's another secondary market as a result of these additional businesses.
So, Deputy Mayor, feel free.
Yeah. So just very briefly to really emphasize, the amount of money that we were bringing in from the business registration was a nominal fee.
96,000.
Correct. And so it is not as if $96,000 is unimportant. Every penny does count. But when you look at the idea of what is the return, so what are we getting? So $96,000, we could hire an individual to go out and do some work after you can think about salary, workers' compensation, taxes, all of that type of stuff. Or conversely, we could say, we know we have a lot of businesses that aren't paying, and if we lower this fee and get those businesses to actually register, what do we get from that? Well, what we get from that is now we actually can go out to large corporations, Target and other retailers, and say, hey, this is what our community looks like. These are the businesses that we have here. Wouldn't you like to be next to these businesses? We can talk to the MEDC, we can talk to other agencies and paint a different story about what the city of Pontiac looks like, but we need the actual businesses registering in order to be able to do that. And additionally, as was stated, once they're there and we know they're there, now we can actually make sure that they are paying their taxes.
So if it just stays at the current level, is it, in terms of number of businesses that register annually, the proposal is to take it down to $50, correct?
Yes.
So that would generate, if it's just at the current, return of number of businesses, that means $30,000 is generated, very, back of the napkin math. So it would take an additional 1,200 businesses to fill that gap. So I just want to offer that, since that question had come up from a council member.
And we know we have that number. When we gave out those reopen kits back in 2020, we thought we only had 600 businesses, but 1,200 businesses with Pontiac addresses came and got those kits.
Is the intention this fiscal year to do any proactive engagement? I'm not trying to say
No.
heavy-handed, but in terms of
So
let them
the
know
answer is
about
yes.
the business.
So yes, and even yes. So the idea is to speak softly and carry a big stick, right? So we want to make it as easy as possible for businesses to register. That is what we want them to do. We want to include a large carrot for their registration, right? So if these businesses want to potentially apply for any type of assistance through the city, they have to be registered. No registration, no services. If, however, you're not registered and we find out that you're not registered, we will fine you, and that fine will be well above the cost that it would have cost you to just register to begin with.
Is there a friendly warning period, or is it a
Well,
bit like code
the
enforcement, X number of hours?
friendly warning period will start sometime after the budget actually goes into effect. But yes, there will be a friendly warning period.
Well, I encourage economic development to, in a very diplomatic and proactive way, communicate it frequently.
So we did kick off our small business program last Saturday. We had approximately 50 businesses there, and then I don't know, like I said, we have about 25 partners. They all weren't there, but quite a few of them were. We talked about the reduction in our business application fee and what we want to do with our businesses in addition to registering, as the deputy just alluded to. In order to access the resources that we're providing, you have to be a registered business. And if you want to get a grant or a loan and you go through the process, you have to be a registered business. And being a registered business, not only would you have like your articles of incorporation, but you'll have a tax ID number, you'll have a business bank account. You'll be more or less, I don't want to say legitimate business, but a business that can move forward in terms of, or expand, I'll just use that word, expand and enhance your business capability. We're looking at mentoring programs and procurement that we would match a smaller business with a larger business, and collectively they may go after contracts. So this whole program is geared towards, again, being a registered business here in the city of Pontiac.
Councilman Nicholson and then Pro Tem Carrington.
Will the code enforcement department still be handling business licensing?
We will definitely work in tandem with them because they're going to be responsible for, any inspections as well.
I know just to speak to some of the proactiveness from Tammy, I've heard of Tammy even Googling Pontiac businesses and being able to create spreadsheets and send out notifications of businesses that haven't registered, that are on Google, that are operating in brick and mortars that we're just not familiar with. So I know that that's already certainly underway, and we've got lists and things like that we're working from. And but I was just curious to know whether or not it's going to come from the administrative part only from code enforcement, and sort of the benefits and programming from the other seems to carry through.
I mean, again, in terms of that level of detail, economic development for sure will know which businesses are registered, and right now code enforcement will know as well. So the application, once it's internal, we'll both, I'll allude to the deputy mayor.
So the short answer to your question, Councilman Nicholson, is yes. The actual handling of the paperwork is code enforcement, but economic development will be breaking out of a silo and being able to better communicate with them. Hey, here's this new business that I know of. Hey, I talked to this company. They're not currently registered. Give me the paperwork so that I can get it to them.
Thank you.
Pro Tem Carrington.
No, I'll refer. They got the question.
Any other discussion on economic development? I see in the budget that salaries and wages versus what was actualized year to date so far. Was the expectation or intention to bring on the additional staff member the previous fiscal year, and just it didn't come to pass? Or what am I looking at? Because it looks like it's almost to the dollar the same in terms of the amended budget versus the recommended budget to come.
So for the previous budget, I will have to defer.
Thank you.
So there was one position that was in the department in this fiscal year that got moved to the mayor's office. And so even though we added a position in that department, the net number stayed the same because one position was added and one position was moved.
Is that position still in existence, or that person's been reclassified, or?
It is. So that is the all of these positions are blurring together in my head, but it's the community representative specialist position, and that had been under the economic development office, but we're not. Frankly, I'm not sure, as we looked into it, why that was ever the case.
And where physically is economic development going to be housed in City Hall? Is that still to be determined, or?
That's a great question. So currently, the building department and the planning department are, as you said, the welcome gate to City Hall. Economic development will be moving down there and joining them. And then the code enforcement division of that group, unfortunately, there's just not enough space there. The code enforcement division of that group will continue where they currently are on the ground floor.
Other discussion on economic development and the budget as requested and proposed by the administration. Hearing no further discussion, we move on the agenda now to public comment. Pro Tem Carrington, you have the floor.
Ms. Gloria Miller.
Good evening. I wouldn't be here, but this is what I'm going to address. And when I want you guys to understand something. When I come down, I love your pretty faces, but I don't want to come down this much. Why is the budget hearings not being televised on Channel 20? We can't see it. And I know some of you are going to say, well, it's on Facebook. The PEG fees for the city of Pontiac give the citizens the right to watch the council meeting on Channel 20. We got a lot of seniors in the city that don't have a clue to how to operate Facebook. And then I was told from a number of businesses, they're not allowed to be on Facebook, so they can't see the meeting that lives here. So if that's a reasoning. And I also want to ask you, Mayor Grimal, maybe you'll just address it next week on Tuesday council meeting. Previously, I was on the 10th council, all the way back. I've been here that long, over 20 some years. Cable was always on the council. Are you planning on putting it back? Because it's not the administration meeting, it is the council meeting. So guess what, guys? I can't hold you, I've been telling my constituents, I can't really hold you responsible because it's not under you, it is under the administration. And I was also told that several meetings were being held. Nothing but nothing trumps the council meeting. People look for that council meeting. They want to know what you're doing with the dollars, with this budget hearing. And not ever, in all the years I've come down here, the budget hearings are televised. They're televised. How will we know what's going on? I know what's going on. I wrote some notes, but there's a lot of my constituents waiting on me to come back and say, what happened? Because they can't watch this. It's not on cable. So I just want to address that. Second of all, the animal ordinance, you guys did get into that. Lynette is very familiar with that. We need that in the city. These are things that you're helping the citizens with. This is about helping them. This is not about Gloria Miller. When I bring these things down to you, these are things I worked on previously and things I said I was going to continue to work on whether I was here or not. Because I'm going to do what I do probably till I die. So when you guys leave, I'll still be here. And when I die, then you don't have to worry about me. Also, Mayor, I know you're going to get rid of Gianmarco and Mullen. What about, Wade Trim. What about Gianmarco and Mullen? Are you going to get rid of them?
As we've discussed at
Order.
I'm sorry. Forgive me.
He can't speak until I get done. Okay, and I got 42 seconds, and it was one more question I had. I think actually I got it all. I got it in real quick. The cable administrator, please put it back on next week. I know you guys got more budget meeting, and you won't see me down here. I watch at my home in my bed and go from there. People are calling. They are really disturbed about why these meetings are not being televised. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. That's it. That concludes our public comment.
All right, we now move on to closing comments. Mayor Grimal.
Again, forgive me.
I do want to recognize Councilman Rutherford as present voting at whatever time it is. 5:53.
Again, forgive me, President McGinnis,
okay.
for speaking in response to public comment. I know that a couple of questions were asked. Regarding the city's law firm, and we've talked about this at a number of council meetings, we are going to do an RFP process. I think at yesterday's council meeting, I mentioned that because of a number of other priorities, we haven't yet gotten that RFP out, but we are hoping to get that RFP out in the next week. And that RFP process will obviously solicit proposals for legal services, and those proposals will not be reviewed just by the executive branch, but also by representatives of council, so that we can make a joint decision about what law firm is best situated to represent the city, not the executive branch, not the legislative branch as individual entities, but jointly the interests of the mayor and council together, and most importantly, the city as a whole. In terms of the questions about the cable broadcasting, I know that the deputy mayor had some conversations with the cable director about that, so I'd like to turn it over, with your permission, President McGinnis, to the deputy mayor to discuss the circumstances.
No objection. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. So just very briefly, last year there were no televised hearings because of COVID. It was what it was. Everything was on the internet. This year, everything is being live streamed to the internet, and so it's on Facebook Live and in other streaming capacities right now. But additionally to that, as soon as these meetings are done and canned, they are put into the rotation on the Pontiac cable channel. And so that is just what is happening this year. We can definitely look together next year to determine if we want to do things differently. And that is really the sum of the answer.
The only other question that was posed was where the cable department should be housed. The cable department has a number of different functions. Certainly one of them is broadcasting city council meetings, but there are other functions as well. I don't really feel strongly about where it should be housed, to be honest, but we structured the budget this year for it to be housed under a communications department because there are some other functions that might go along with the cable department in a communications department, certainly longer term. But, you know, it's something that we're open to having a conversation about.
I do want to share for my colleagues and the community's benefit. We talked about this when we were setting the budget hearing schedule, but we really were crunched by the existing board and commission meetings. Hello, Mariah Taylor Rutherford. Look at you. Great to see you there. We were really crunched by the existing boards and commission meetings that were already scheduled, including the medical marijuana appeals commissions, which were taking basically almost every Thursday in May. But there's the Board of Appeals, the Planning Commission, all these other demands, which my vision is that once we conclude this process, we determine what works best for the City Council and lay it out for this time next year. And I think it makes sense that we have like Thursday evenings in May. We say 5 to 9 p.m. for 4 Thursdays in May. The administration can plan around it. We can plan, you know, work and life and demands. That's a big chunk of time, but we've been trying to basically shoehorn it in on the different days where we can, and also that way the administration can be even more comprehensive with building out the presentations, that they can choose the order sort of what departments they can come in, that kind of thing, because it is very much piecemeal right now, and that's just us working, coming in when something, the framework was already in existence. So that's a lesson and a takeaway that I think will help in terms of the consistency of public broadcasting. So that way, you know, it's known. We reserve those Thursdays in May that early, that it's known that no other, you know, commission meetings are to be scheduled during that time, et cetera. So that could help us strategically looking forward, so that way residents can kind of know, hey, it's sort of like it's something to plan around in terms of their schedule, and also make sure that it gets the attention and interest that it warrants based on what the residents were after. Mayor Grima?
Yeah, I do want to note too, you know, and as I said, I'm open-minded about how the cable department should best be administered. Obviously, it has functions that go beyond just city council meetings, so it's a little unclear and ambiguous where it's best administered. But I do just want to note for the public that at least for a little over 8 years now, I think it has been under the mayor's office. So it's not like we're proposing a change for it to be under the mayor's office. That's where it has been. And it's not actually, we're not actually proposing that it be under the mayor's office. We're proposing that it be in a communications department that would be under the executive branch. So, but that's largely because it's been under the executive branch for so long. So, you know, we're open to that conversation, but I do just want to be clear that currently, and by that I mean the past 8 years, it's been under the executive branch for whatever reason, and I think it's been either kind of a standalone cable department, which has in effect meant that it reports to the mayor, and we're actually proposing that it be under a communications department with a separate communications director. But just because it's functioned this way in the past, we've proposed that it be under the executive branch. In our budget proposal, we're open to that conversation, like I said. I do wonder, because it's been under the executive branch for so long, I don't know what the history was with previous councils in terms of whether they proposed to have it be under the council and whether they amended the budget to reflect that. And
I know
it sounds
Legislative Counsel Sharp can give us some information of that, but
Yeah.
how about we defer that to when we bring up communications?
that would be great.
'Cause
Yeah.
we can do a deeper dive. and
Exactly. I
comprehensive.
mean, obviously, the past council could have amended the budget to bring it under council, and I'm seeing from Ms. Sharp shaking of her head that that did not occur. Okay. Okay.
So we don't have on the agenda closing comments in the traditional sense, but as we did with yesterday's budget special meeting, any additional questions or thoughts from colleagues before we adjourn? Councilwoman Rutherford.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to thank Council President Mike McGinnis for expressing my concerns for me when I wasn't available. It means a lot that I'm able to still be inactive, but be here, but not be actually physically here. And also, Pro Tem Carrington for expressing my concerns in previous times. I just want everybody to learn to have some patience. This is a new thing. We're trying to do everything right in decency and in order. And lastly, tomorrow is the cleanup for the best side there ever was, South Side, in District 1, through Crestwood, Astorwood. So I hope that you guys are all willing to come out and help out, because just because you don't live in District 1 doesn't mean you can't come help out in District 1. And those are my closing comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone further wish to have the floor? Oh, we're going to have a Crestwood, Astorwood.
Love Fest.
Okay.
Yes, I did just want to say I will be there.
Thank you,
I will
sir.
be there at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Is the dumpster
I ain't going to be there at 9. I gotta
And
hear
the
from you.
dumpster is there, or at least will be there before 9 a.m. tomorrow. I know that it will be there either today. I believe it will be there today if it's not there already.
All right, motion to adjourn from Councilman Nicholson. Is there a second?
Support.
Supported by Rutherford. Hearing no discussion.
Yes.
Roll call on adjournment. Nicholson voted yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Rutherford,
Yes.
Carrington,
Yes.
Goodman.
Yes.
6-0.
That motion carries. We stand adjourned at 6:04 p.m. Thank you very much. Have a safe weekend. The next meeting is Monday, the 23rd, from 4 to 6 p.m.